This is episode 78 of the 99th Forever podcast. I'm Eric Friesen, and my guest tonight is making his fourth appearance on the podcast from the Cult of Hockey, Bruce McCurdy. Bruce, it's good to have you back on the show.
Hey, Eric, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I always look forward to talking with you about the Oilers' glory days, and while most of our conversation today will be about the 1980s and early 1990s, you and I will be talking about the Oilers from this decade for the first time as well.
Mm-hmm. Some glory days are upon us. I think this is maybe not the right timing to say they've returned, but things certainly have taken a turn for the better in the last few years.
Yeah, it's still early in the season, so we remain hopeful that this year's edition of the Oilers are going to turn things around. But first, Charlie Huddy and Doug Weight were enshrined in the Edmonton Oilers Hall of Fame prior to last night's game. I know you were at the game, so I'd like to get a thought from you just on both of their careers with the Oilers. So let's start in chronological order with Huddy. While Paul Coffey was winning Norris trophies and breaking scoring records for defensemen, his defensive partner Huddy was quietly a big part of the Oilers dynasty as well. What made Huddy such a versatile and effective player for the Oilers for parts of 11 seasons?
Well, he kind of came out of nowhere, didn't he? Like he was drafted. He wasn't drafted. He was signed as an undrafted free agent in the summer of 1979 after the phenomenal 1979 draft that included two full draft classes of 20 and 19-year-olds. The league was just in the process of lowering the draft age to 18. It was a 2-year process of double draft classes, and both were brilliant, 79 and 80. Moreover, in 79, there was just 6 rounds for the 21 teams, so only 126 players got selected. And unselected were guys like Tim Kerr, who went on to 4 consecutive 50-goal seasons with Philadelphia Flyers, and Charlie Huddy, who went on to become one of the Magnificent Seven, who won 5 Stanley Cups in Edmonton. And he was exactly what the doctor ordered for. He was yin to Paul Coffey's yang. Like they just fit together like hand in a glove. Huddy looked after a whole lot of the little details, and he had enough offense in his game that he was able to help out in that respect too. He was the one who made the shift. They were both left shot defensemen. He was the one who made the shift over to the right side. Did so very successfully, and he just had what I would call an all-round game. You know, he did a little bit of everything. He could move the puck out of his own end. He could keep the puck in the other end. In fact, if I had to pick one signature skill of Charlie Huddy, that would be it. His phenomenal ability along the blue line to keep the play alive and onside and continue the cycle. And that was part of the reason that Huddy was a regular on the Oilers power play. You might think in those days and think Big Five, automatically that's the power play. But the days of 4 forwards, 1 defenseman were still very much in the future in those days. So Huddy and Coffey manned the points, and 3 forwards up front, typically Gretzky, Curry, and Anderson, was probably the most common deployment in those days. And poor Mark Messier, he had to spend time on the second unit at times throughout that, and I'm sure there are, he had his own time on the first unit, but I think the most common one was the one with Curry and Anderson, and of course the great one. Anyway, Huddy was just such a terrific. He was a glue player and very smart guy. As you know, he went on to become an assistant coach in the NHL, and his coaching career was actually longer than his playing career, which is to say between the two of them, close to 40 years in the best league of them all, from a guy who never even got drafted out of junior. And he could score some. You know, his first 3 years, 3 full years, he had 61, 52, 46 points. And, he had 57, 42, and 51 points. And the other numbers I gave you, 61, 52, 46, those were his plus figures.
Wow.
Like, this guy was a phenomenal outscorer.
And he led the league in plus minus in 82, 83.
Yeah, the year that they first, and it was a very short span that they actually recognized the leading plus minus player, and it was called the Emery Edge. And people used the fact that Charlie Huddy won the first one to ridicule plus minus, of course, which generally many people have been doing ever since. And while the stat does have its weaknesses, it also has its strengths. And in the 7-year span from when he first broke in midway through 81, 82, right up to 87, 88, the fourth cup that after which Gretzky led town, he had a cool plus 253 in 483 games. Not bad. And in the same span in the playoffs, let's see now, he was plus 71 in 91 games. Plus 71 in 91 games. And he does rank among the very top players of all time in playoff plus. And by all time, I mean just in the time they've been recording the statistic, which of course is not all time, but since expansion, I believe, 67. So anyway, Charlie was a scorer and an outscorer, and he was a winner.
And you look at him and Paul Coffey, two very different players, but
Yeah.
as you sort of alluded to, they blended very well together. Were you surprised that Glenn Sather trusted two young defensemen on the same pair early in the 1980s, as opposed to maybe putting Coffey with a more veteran player?
Well, he had basically three young defensemen in his top four. Lee Fogland was really the vet there, and because Kevin Lowe was roughly the same age as the other fellows. I mean, Huddy was born in 59, Coffey in 61, Lowe, I believe, was also 59. They were all coming up together as young players. Of them, Huddy needed a little bit of seasoning, about a year and a half seasoning in the minor leagues before he emerged as a full-time NHLer. But he was check that, more like 2.5 years. He got a cup of coffee his second year, and then he became a full-time halfway through his third year in 81, 82, just as the Oilers were emerging as a true NHL powerhouse. But no, nothing Glenn Sather did surprise me. I mean, he trusted young players with everything. Like, the young players were the core of his team. And right from early days, he went with his big four up front were all young guys as well, and he used them in every situation. And it was the core strength of his team, and to Sather's credit, he rolled with it.
For sure. And when the Oilers returned to the playoffs in 1997, I was 8 years old. And for fans around my age, Doug Weight was the first high-end player we watched on the Oilers. He arrived in Edmonton following the dynasty and was the best player on a team operating on a shoestring budget for nearly a decade. Bruce, Weight is best remembered as an elite playmaker, but he brought a wide range of skills to the table, didn't he?
Yeah, he sure did. I mean, elite playmaker in his career, 278 goals, 755 assists. So a better part of a 3-to-1 ratio, assists to goals, which is a elite playmaker. But certainly he had the capacity to do his own sniping. I mean, 278 goals in his career is a pretty decent total. But first and forward, a playmaker. But that aside, there were other aspects to his game, including a real edge to his game. Like, he had a little bit of a nasty element to him. And I remember him taking a major penalty for what they call a hit from behind. I maintain it was a hit from the side in a playoff game against Dallas. It didn't help, but it just showed. It was an example of the edge that he played with. Another incident that I remember well is the time Brian Marchment, a former teammate of Weight, but now with San Jose Sharks, delivered one of his infamous knee-on-knee checks to Weight in a game in San Jose early in the first period. And Weight limped off to the dressing room, Ethan Morrow challenged Marchment to a fight, and he got rewarded with the instigator penalty, and San Jose got a power play, even though Marchment had kneed and injured Edmonton's captain and star player. Let's start there. And then a few minutes later, Waite returned from the dressing room, got back out on the ice, and the first thing he did was make a beeline for Brian Marchment and challenge him and take him on in a scrap, which is, Marchment was a pretty tough guy, and he would take anyone on. One thing Marchment wasn't was that he wouldn't run and hide. He would stand up to it. Anyway, by the time that melee was over, our friend Mr. Referee saw fit to award Waite 6 penalties for 39 minutes, matching his sweater number. 39 minutes for a single incident. 2 minors, a major, 2 misconducts, and a game misconduct.
It's Meanwhile,
Brian Marchment got zero. Like, he didn't get a roughing minor. Like any fight you ever see, even the guy that gets instigated, he typically gets a major, and the other guy gets extra over and above his major. So this was, I think, the second longest penalty kill in Oilers history, behind only the Kevin Lowe versus Tony McKegney incident in 1980. And they had to kill 9 minutes, and the team was so inspired that they actually won that penalty kill 1-0.
Oh, wow.
And wound up coming away with a point in a very tough building, the Shark Tank at that time. But what it just showed was that, you mess around with Doug Waite, you better be prepared to answer the bell, because he wasn't a guy to wait for a teammate to do stuff. He would get right in there himself, and I respected that, and I for sure respected his his leadership, his playmaking ability, and his ability to score the occasional dazzling goal, like the one we've seen a number of times lately, where he's kind of skated literally backwards between the Calgary Flames defense, and then did a backhand to forehand roof job deke on the goalie Rick Tabaracci. And one of the great Oilers goals of all time, to be honest. And you watch the replay of that one, and it's still breathtaking. So, anyways, he fully earning the honor of the Oilers Hall of Fame. So far, they haven't missed a beat. I think all 4 guys that they put up in the last 2 years have fully warranted the honor. And the only thing is, it's only 2 a year, and they got more guys to honor than. It's going to take them a while to catch up. And we got guys like Bill Hunter and Joey Moss in terms of off-ice people, and any number of on-ice players as well, including Esa Tikkanen, Randy Gregg, and on down the line of greats who graced the oil drop, and will hopefully get their day in the sun eventually.
Oh, without a doubt. And although Waite didn't win Stanley Cups with the Oilers like captains Wayne Gretzky and Mark Messier before him, he led the team to a couple memorable playoff upsets in the late 90s. Bruce, how valuable was Waite in not only getting the Oilers back to the playoffs after a 4-year absence, but then knocking off a couple cup contenders like the Dallas Stars and the Colorado Avalanche in back-to-back years?
Well, he seemed to thrive in the playoffs. Like the sort of edginess of his game, the compete level in his game really shone through. I certainly remember him and Todd Marchant 2-on-2 against Dallas in overtime in Game 7, where he fed Marchant, and Marchant burned wide around Grant Ledger, and then buried a rare perfect shot past Andy Moog for the series winner. And Waite was heavily involved in that series deciding plays. One that quickly pops to mind. But he just, he was sort of the heart and soul guy, and not always the case for a guy who's first and foremost a scorer, but he was to me a courageous player and a strong leader. Speaking of which, I think he led the team in scoring 7 years that he was here. The 8?
Second most in Oilers history, behind
only the great one. Yeah, he would a 9 out of 9, of course, for Wayne, or 10 out of 10 if you count the WHA.
Mm-hmm.
And but Waite was every year, but 1 year he missed about half the season with injury, and his line mate Bill Guerin picked up the slack. But otherwise, he was just a constant at the top of that team leaderboard. And fair to say that he didn't have a huge amounts of help that that players in other eras like Gretzky or McDavid, that were surrounded with other sort of very high end scorers. And Waite was, clearly the standard bearer on that team.
Well, without a doubt. And lastly, before we move on, you touched on this briefly with some of the names who will be in the running in the coming years. But in your opinion, who do you think should be the next two inductees to the franchise's Hall of Fame?
Players?
Just if it was your choice and it was anyone who's eligible under the criteria, who would you elect to the Hall of Fame next year?
Oh boy. Well, I named two off-ice guys, and I'd like to see them get in. Bill Hunter and Joey Moss, I think, is, just in some ways the face of the long-term Edmonton Oilers franchise. So I will do a little dance and say those are the two off ice, and I'll take two on ice, and I named them already, actually, in persons of Randy Gregg, who I greatly admire, who won in the city not just 5 Stanley Cups with the Oilers as one of the Magnificent Seven, but also 2 national championships with the Alberta Golden Bears. He captained the Canadian Olympic team, and he's been a pillar of our community for a long, long time. And to me, he's he would be he's the only one of the Magnificent Seven at this point who isn't up there. Huddy being the 6th one, and the other 5 having already banners raised in their honor. And man, I like Esa Tikkanen as a choice for that spot. I also like Al Shemsky.
It's a long list of guys.
It's a good list. We're good for at least the next 3 to 5 years, in my opinion, Eric.
Yeah. And, of course, Wild Bill Hunter is from my hometown of Saskatoon. So, of course, I'd love to see him have his moment and be enshrined in the Hall of Fame as well. All right, let's move on to our main topic of discussion today. And since we're only 2 days away from the 2023 Heritage Classic at Commonwealth Stadium between the Edmonton Oilers and Calgary Flames, I thought it would be a perfect time to have you on the podcast to discuss the playoff history of the Battle of Alberta. But before we look back on that first playoff meeting between the Oilers and Flames, I just want to start by asking you, what do you remember about the first Battle of Alberta game you ever attended?
Well, I attended the first Battle of Alberta game, period, that took place in the National Hockey League. And it was in the fall of 1980 when the Flames had just gotten into the league. Some said on the coattails of the success of the Oilers the year before that people realized Alberta was hockey country. And Atlanta, Georgia was not. And so the Flames wound up in Calgary and kept their name from Atlanta, which has always been a little incongruous. But the very first game, the first goal in the Battle of Alberta was scored by none other than Dave Semenko, who was enjoying his greatest week as an NHL player, give or take the cups that he won. But in 80-81, he went on a road trip with the Oilers, and they put him up on Gretzky's line for a while. And he scored on a Saturday night a goal in against the Islanders. On the Sunday night, he got a hat trick and an assist in a 4-2 win at Madison Square Garden. Can you imagine?
Not too bad.
And then he came home, and the crowd was greeting him for that. And wouldn't you know, he goes out and he scores the first goal in the Battle of Alberta. I'm just getting the details. October 22nd, 1980. And Dave Semenko from Wayne Gretzky and Blair McDonald. There you go. That's a first line power play goal, no less. In the first period. And then in the second period, Dave Semenko scores again, his 6th of the young season from Wayne Gretzky, and that stood up as the game winner in the 5-3 Oilers triumph. So my memory of the first Battle of Alberta is of Dave Semenko, offensive hero, and I believe first star of that game.
And deservedly so, it sounds like it. And he, as you said,
wound up with 11 on the season. Like this was, it was just
his
like
shining
an out-of-body
moment.
experience where everything was going right for him, and he was playing, really well as well as he could play. And he was a big guy, with some degree of big lumbering talent. But when he got his speed up, steaming down the wing, he could be an impressive sight. And he certainly had a big role to play in the Battle of Alberta in subsequent years.
And I didn't realize that he scored the first ever goal in Battle of Alberta history. I did know that he scored the final goal in WHA history in the 1979 Avco Cup final. But that's an interesting fact to know that he was also the first goal scorer in this legendary rivalry as well. And in fact, my first Battle of Alberta was also my first ever NHL game on April 1st, 2006.
Oh, yeah.
And I was 17 years old, and my parents and my sister and I drove out to Edmonton for the game and took the Friday off school to make sure we were there for Hockey Night in Canada the next night. And unfortunately, the Oilers lost 4-1 that night. I did get to see George Larocque beat Chris Simon in a fight, though, so that was probably the.
That's a heavyweight tilt.
Yeah, it was. That was probably the best moment of the night. And then, although that game didn't turn out well, 2006 turned out to be a pretty special year for the Oilers still.
Yeah, it worked out not too bad. They were kind of nip and tuck for the playoffs there.
Right to the end,
around that time. They
clinched on the second
wins,
last
and they
game.
didn't get in till like the very, very late in the season.
I think game 81 they clinched a playoff spot.
They beat Anaheim. I think it was 2-1, and Alashemsky scored the winner. And
I can picture the goal in my head.
I was at that game, and he scored in the 60th minute. And then I went home and I listened to, who was it they were battling with? Vancouver. And I listened to it on the internet, the third period of the Vancouver game on the West Coast that the Canucks lost, and the Oilers clinched with, the double result, the win for Edmonton, the loss for Vancouver, put Edmonton over the top.
And I mean, just to barely scrape their way into the playoffs and then go all the way to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup final, I still consider it the most fun I've ever had watching hockey. And hopefully this current edition of the Oilers will be able to have a run like that sometime soon as well.
That was a Chris Pronger team, and they led the NHL. They allowed the few shots on goal of any team in the league that year.
Yeah,
and I think they had the third best shot differential, and they just couldn't get any saves. They had this three-headed monster playing net until the trade deadline, and they went out and got Dwayne Rolison and kind of solved that problem. And that sort of was the missing link on the team that set the stage for them making that run.
Yeah, Ty Conklin, UC Markkinen, I believe Mike Morrison was the third.
Yes. Yeah.
The little known
Morrison was the guy they'd bring in for the shootouts, because
didn't they bring him in once just for the shootout? He didn't play a single minute in the game.
Yes.
That's such a rare strategy. I mean, I can't imagine another team trying to do that today, of bringing in a cold goalie who's been sitting on the bench for 60 minutes or 65 minutes, I guess, to jump into a shootout. But yeah, I mean, it was effective for him for a short period of time.
Yeah, well, he was. They were battling hard. That season they won only 28 games in regulation that year, and they lost 28, and the other 26 all went to overtime or the shootout.
Didn't they also set the franchise record for most road wins that year?
I doubt it, just because I didn't have enough wins.
Okay,
but maybe in the playoffs they did, because if that's specific to the playoffs, very possibly.
It was a fact that I thought I remembered. I'll have to look back on it one of these times. And Bruce, as someone who's followed the NHL since the 1960s, where would you rank the Battle of Alberta amongst the fiercest rivalries you've ever watched in your lifetime?
Well, my personal experience, number one, because of course I was in the building for a bunch of those games, especially during the heat of the rivalries in the 80s and early 90s when I was a season ticket holder. But there are other rivalries. I mean, the Islanders Rangers rivalry is fairly historic, and I mean, on all-time terms, Montreal Toronto, Montreal Boston are way up there. But in the spirit of this podcast, I'll choose the Battle of Alberta.
And thankfully, the team we both cheer for is the superior team in that rivalry, which always makes it better.
Well, in the playoffs, they certainly were, and that's
where we're headed next.
Oh, good. Regular season, Calgary actually has a better record.
Yeah.
But in the playoffs, the Oilers have convincingly the better record.
And let's look back at that first series now. So after sweeping the Winnipeg Jets in the opening round of the 1983 playoffs, the Oilers moved on to face the Flames in the Smythe Division final. Bruce, was this the most highly anticipated playoff series in Oilers history at the time?
First one against Calgary? I'll say no, just because in 81, when they played Montreal in the first round, when, Montreal was just removed from being a 4-time dynasty, and the Oilers were just a fresh new NHL team playing, the most storied franchise of all, and then beating them the way they did. Calgary was a rival, but Edmonton expected to beat Calgary, and they did. In fact, they thumped them in 83. And that said, my own experience was odd in that for this particular series, I was nowhere near Edmonton. In fact, I was in Rankin Inlet in what is now Nunavut. So I watched all 5 of the games on the hotel bar in Rankin Inlet. I was up there on business at the time, and so it was a very different experience. But I found my comfort zone in that hotel bar, not with the libations or anything, but with the the medium-sized tube screen of the day, watching the Oilers make mincemeat of the Flames.
Yeah. I mean, that's you probably would have liked to have been back in Edmonton, but still yes. Get this. Always better to see the Oilers beat the Flames no matter where you are.
Yeah. Well, I was in out in the middle of nowhere. I think I was out on one edge of nowhere, right on the Hudson Bay.
Yep. And in game 1 of that first ever playoff Battle of Alberta, it was Mark Messier who scored early and often for his hometown team, Bruce.
Yeah, it sure was. I remember this game pretty well. It was a man-to-man showdown between Messier and Paul Reinhart, who scored all 3 Calgary goals in what was to be a 6-3 Edmonton win. But Messier answered all of those goals plus one more, scoring 4 times and leading the Oil to a fairly comfortable win in the end. Of course, Messier had a little more help than Reinhart did. And it was Messier who was the really hot figure really throughout the first 3 rounds of those playoffs in 83. Before he banged up his shoulder against the Hawks, he was dynamite, and he had 4 goals in this particular game. And Gretzky, for his part, had, where are you, Wayne? Nothing, not even a point. Oh, what a poser.
He surely made up for it in other games in that series.
Yeah. He was.
We'll get to one in particular in a minute.
Yeah.
And in game 2, 5 different Oilers skaters scored en route to a convincing 5-1 victory and a 2-0 series lead at Northlands Coliseum. And Bruce, although the Oilers were loaded with offensive superstars, it always helped when guys like Randy Gregg and Don Jackson could chip in a goal, didn't it?
Yeah, they scored consecutively in the late in the first period that opened up a 3-1 Oilers lead, and it just kind of hung around at 3-1, and then they finally padded it in the third period with a couple more. But it sure does. I mean, Willie Lindstrom was another depth guy that potted a goal in that game. And the others, well, Yari Curry and Paul Coffey, we've heard of them. But that was a game. I don't remember a whole lot about it because it was just sort of convincing. Edmonton was the better team. It was a rough game. Like the penalty column, as usual, is very, very long. We've got Dave Semenko and Tim Hunter, delay of game. That was the first one, and you know that they weren't shooting the puck over the glass. They were
a little rougher than that.
Yeah, they dropped the gloves and didn't fight or something similar, and the refs dealt with it that way. But we also had a fight, second game in a row between Don Jackson and Jim Poplinski. Won by 3 games in a row they fought, and Jackson won all 3, in my biased view at least. And just a lot of rough stuff going on. And, just chippiness and sort of Edmonton Calgary type stuff. And Oilers cruised. I think Andy Moog had a fairly strong game, but Edmonton wasn't never really threatened. Once they got that 2-goal lead, they just by their standards shut things down.
And after winning both games on home ice, Wayne Gretzky broke the NHL record for most points in a playoff game with 7, including 4 goals and 3 assists, as the Oilers routed the Flames 10-2 in Game 3 at the Stampede Corral. Bruce, it's now been more than 40 years since that game in April of 1983. Where would you rank Gretzky's 7-point night against the Flames amongst his most dominant single-game playoff performances with the Oilers?
Yeah, well, it's definitely pretty high on that list. He would match. He got another 7-point game against Winnipeg Jets in '85, I think it was. And strangely, that was one of the very first and still one of the very, very few Wayne Gretzky records to be broken. And generally, the only Gretzky records that do get broken are the single game or fastest 2 shorthanded goals, or something that's in such a small quantity that it's possible for someone else to.
Because any of the career marks are just so out of reach.
Yeah, the career marks, forget it. Patrick Sundstrom wound up with an 8-point game to knock Gretzky down a peg on that leaderboard. Pretty sure he's the only one to have 3 such games. He also had one against LA Kings, his future team, in '87.
A game we've talked about on this podcast in the past as well.
Yes, that's the night he broke Jean Beliveau's record.
Yep.
Wound up the night 7 points ahead of him. Career record for points. Anyway, in this particular game, I'll never forget this game. And this is one that, for whatever reason, this one game got picked up and is occasionally shown at places like NHL Network. So I've seen it rebroadcast a couple of times to solidify some of the details. But
actually, right before the playoffs in 2022, I think right before Game 1 between the Oilers and Flames in the second round, I believe they showed this on NHL Classics. As almost to just get the fans, psyched up for the upcoming playoff series.
Yeah, well, it was a classic, and it started. This was fairly typical for the Flames of that day. Was that they would play the Oilers in Edmonton, and and there'd be some rough stuff and so on, but they'd go back to Calgary, and then the fights would break out. And it seemed like most of the big brawls between Edmonton and Calgary took place in Calgary. In this case, the old Calgary Corral. And not 5 minutes into the first period, there was an incident involving Dave Semenko, Don Jackson, Tim Hunter, and Jim Poplinski, with Semenko taking on Hunter and Poplinski and Jackson having their 3rd straight tilt for the 3rd straight game. Both Semenko and Jackson got the heave-ho 4 minutes into the first period. And for Calgary, Poplinski got the boot. And at that point, I was like, a little bit concerned that, Edmonton just lost their two toughest players and Calgary's kind of gooning it up out there. What's going to happen next? Not to mention the fact that Semenko took a 5-minute match penalty in the brawl. I think it was for kneeing in the aftermath of the fight. Anyways, he got the boot. Calgary got a 5-minute power play, and you're thinking, okay, here it comes. And the Oilers killed the first 4 minutes of the penalty, and then in the 5th minute, Edmonton scores a shorthanded goal, Coffey from Gretzky and Curry. Not bad penalty killers for Edmonton on the ice, and it set a trend. That was the only power play in the first period, and Edmonton scored. In the second period, there was one power play on a Kevin Lowe hooking penalty for Calgary, and Edmonton scored again. Wayne Gretzky from Yari Curry and Randy Gregg. And then in the third period, there was one power play again. Lee Fogland took a hooking penalty. Edmonton scored again. Mark Messier from Wayne Gretzky. So literally, Edmonton scored 10 goals in this game, 10-2 win. Not only did they not score a power play goal, they didn't even have a power play in the entire game. Calgary had 3 power plays, and Edmonton scored a shorthanded goal on all 3. I've never seen the like since, and I honestly, I think, Eric, I could live to be 300 years old, and I wouldn't see it again.
No, it's very rare.
3 shorties on the penalty kill.
Yeah, and I mean, if you just watch that game, it really looked like Gretzky was a man against boys. It just seemed, every time he touched the puck, something magical happened, and it seemed like he was just creating scoring chances at will, which was commonplace for him at this time. But there were games where it seemed like everything seemed to go in for him, and this was one of those nights.
Yeah, and his passes were finding targets, and the targets were scoring. I mean, those shorties by Coffey and Messier were a couple of his assists. He also set up Messier.
Messier had a hat-trick
goal
overshadowed
in the third period. So Wayne wound up with 4 goals himself and 3 primary assists. And Edmonton, the stars came out to shine. 4 for Wayne, 3 for Coffey, 1 each for Anderson, and 4 for Coffey or Gretzky, 3 for Messier, 1 each for Coffey and Anderson, and Curry only had 3 assists on this night. And one of the bottom 6 guys, Ray Cote, also scored. But otherwise, it was the main guys doing almost all of the damage.
And Gretzky seemed to have some of his bigger moments in that building. I mean, let's not forget the first time he hit 200 points in a season was at the Stampede Corral.
Sure was. Yeah, set up Pat Hughes in the a rare time that he got a big ovation from the fans in Calgary, because they recognized 200 points was pretty special. And this was in March of 1982. He got his 200th point in the first period, and in classic Gretzky fashion, he set an entirely unrelated NHL record later in the game when he scored 2 shorthanded goals in 27 seconds.
Jeez.
And so that record's gone, and it was subsequently beaten by the one in the same Pat Hughes that scored the goal that was his 200th point, who got 2 in 25 seconds the next year. That was the first Gretzky record to fall. And then, believe it or not, yet a third Oiler, Esa Tikkanen, would break that record again in 1988 with 2 shorties in 12 seconds, and that's still the record. So the Oilers of the 80s absolutely owned all of the shorthanded records, and they still own basically most of them.
Oh, definitely. And, 10 years ago when I was going to broadcasting school in Calgary, I had the opportunity to play in a charity hockey game at the old corral. A friend of mine was an employee at the Stampede, and he asked if I wanted to come out and play in their event. And, I was just playing rec hockey at school at the time, but I thought, what an opportunity to get the chance to skate in the same building where Wayne Gretzky set some of his biggest records. And I think that's the only time I've ever skated in the same arena that he has. So I wanted to take advantage of that opportunity.
No doubt.
And I don't believe it's still standing today, though. I think they might have knocked it down.
The corral?
Yeah. I can't remember if I'll have to look into that if they put something else there.
I know I went to the Olympics there in 1988, I went to a game in the Saddle Dome and a game in the Corral that were basically ongoing at the same time. It's a long story, but
Okay.
it was my one lifetime Olympic experience was watching two simultaneous hockey games.
Was that the only time you've ever been to the Saddle Dome, or have you seen other games
No,
there?
I saw Edmonton get absolutely thumped there in 1989-90 season. They lost 7-2. There was a bus tour that went down, and then the next night they played the backup game in Edmonton, and the Oilers won 6-0. So they actually won the total goals on the back-to-back, but I saw the one
Just
in Calgary.
missed the good one. I've only been to one Battle of Alberta ever in that building, and unfortunately, well, in a sense, fortunately, I got to see Leon Draisaitl's 50th goal live.
Oh, right. Okay, this was the game Wayne. This is the game Connor got hurt.
Yeah. So it's a very bittersweet night. It was actually when we were hosting our heavy hockey showdown game that we have here at our network, and like I said, the night started off on a pretty good note and ended on a not so good note, but it's one that I'll definitely never forget. That's for sure. And after taking a commanding 3-0 series lead, the Oilers looked to complete the sweep on the road, but despite a late push, they ultimately fell just short in their comeback bid, Bruce.
Yeah, 6-5. This was the last playoff game. In fact, this was the last NHL game played in the Corral. And the Oilers wanted to finish them off. But after beating Calgary so convincingly in the prior game, they came out rather predictably with a slow start. And Calgary came out with the kind of desperation that one associates with a team on the brink. And not to mention that they'd been badly embarrassed on their home ice. And the Flames rolled out to a 6-2 lead halfway through the third period before Edmonton mounted a furious comeback that brought it to 6-5, and they just simply ran out of time by the buzzer. And so the end result of that game was Calgary fans got to celebrate a win and at least not avoid the ignominious sweep. But the way the game ended left little doubt as to what was in store for the short remaining future of the series.
And after the Oilers' 6-game winning streak in the playoffs was snapped, the Battle of Alberta shifted back to Edmonton for Game 5. And for the second time in the series, the Oilers beat the Flames by 8 goals as they won the game 9-1 and the series 4-1. Bruce, watching the Oilers knock off their provincial rivals and claim the Smythe Division title on home ice had to have been one of your most satisfying victories as an Oilers fan at the time.
Well, again, I was watching from Rankin Inlet, so in a sense it didn't matter which barn the game was played in, but seeing the Oilers smoke Calgary by 8 is, a pleasurable experience for sure. And to have it happen twice in very short order like that, all the more so. This game, frankly, was much less memorable than the 10-2 game with all the shorthanded goals and Gretzky absolutely dancing at the height of his powers in Calgary. Whereas in this game, they just kind of overwhelmed them, and Calgary knew they were done, and they just really gave up the ghost. As Calgary had 40 shots on net, and Edmonton had 42. It wasn't exactly a defensive struggle, but one goalie was making saves, and the other goalie was facing Wayne Gretzky.
And 8 different Oilers players had multi-point games.
Yeah, there you go. Let's see, yeah. We had, Coffey and Gretzky was 3, Huddy, Hughes, Hunter, Curry, Lindstrom, and Lowe with 2 each. Not bad.
Yeah, and
team effort.
Exactly. And when you look at the score sheet, the Oilers were only up 2-0 after the first period, but that 5-goal second period really put things in a way. And I'm guessing as both teams were coming out for the third period, the Flames side probably just wanted to get out of there.
They wanted to get a goal and go home.
They
got the one goal.
They got the one to break the shutout.
Kept the score down to 9-1. It's all good.
For sure. And the following spring, there was a rematch of the Battle of Alberta in the 1984 Smythe Division final. And Although the Oilers were the defending Campbell Conference champions and had just posted a franchise record 119 points in the regular season, did you expect the Flames to be a tougher out for the Oilers than the prior year?
I did. I did. I thought the Flames were a tougher team. I mean, the Oilers won with 119 points and Calgary had 89, I think it was. So, there was a big gap, but Calgary showed some moxie in some of the games, and they clearly were starting to gear up their team to specifically compete with the Oilers, because they knew if they couldn't beat the Oilers, they were never going to get anywhere, because they had to play Edmonton first or second at best in the playoffs. And this year it was, they finished second, so they got an easier first round opponent, and then they wound up running into Edmonton in second round. But I was expecting a little tougher show. I mean, Edmonton wasn't going to beat them by 35 goals to 13 again, like they had in '83. And it turned out that Calgary spaced their goals in such a way that they won 3 one-goal games, including 2 in overtime in this series to stretch it out.
And do you still have that goal difference off the top of your head?
35 to 13, sure do.
That's pretty impressive.
35, yeah. I mean, it was a 5-game series and was a record for goals scored by a team in a series of any length.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, as I mentioned before, when you beat a team by 8 twice in the same series, you probably got a good chance at the record.
Yeah. No, they and even in the game they lost, they scored 5, right? So right. It was a complete one-sided affair. It was 83-84. Calgary put up a fight, and Edmonton was hard pressed to, even games early in the series that they won were not easy. Wins.
And we'll get into that right now. In game 1, the Flames scored first on the road, but the Oilers took control of the game from that point on.
Yep. Rolled to a 5-2 win. With scoring late in the first period to tie it up. And that was kind of the key there. And then they jumped out in front in the second with a couple, and then put it away in the third with clinching goal, and then an empty netter at the end. So 5-2 was closer than the score would indicate. On the other hand, shots on goal were 54-29 for Edmonton, which is a fairly rare thing. So they were really pounding Réjean Lemelin in the Calgary net, who let in only 4 goals, which was a terrific night's work. But Edmonton they were on the night certainly clearly the better team.
And in game 2, the Flames trailed by 3 in the second period before scoring 4 unanswered goals to take a 5-4 lead with 1 minute and 33 seconds remaining in the final frame. However, Gretzky scored with just 45 seconds left on the clock to send the game to overtime.
Yeah, Calgary, they just kept coming. It was 4-1. They scored late in the second on a goal by the immortal Eddie Beers. And then Richard Crom scored. Kerry Wilson scored. Steve Bozick scored on the power play to put him ahead. The minute and a half to go in the third. These are not household names, but Calgary had a ton of these guys that were silent and not necessarily deadly, but pretty good hockey players that could hurt you. And the Oilers responded, pulling the goalie to score the tying goal and send Northlands into a frenzy. And I thought, we're going to come back and win this game. And I still remember that overtime. Calgary came out and they were, because it was the fourth period, they were attacking the far end. We sat in the Oilers' defensive end in the first and third periods. And Calgary just came out and they just stormed the Bastille from the beginning of overtime. They scored at 3 minutes 42. And as I recollect, the shots were 7-0. But what I more clearly recollect was the game was over and the teams were going off the ice. And I looked out at the ice, and the ice was all white and chopped up at the far end, and the ice in our end was completely. It's like the Zamboni had just cleaned it. Like Oilers never even got over center in the overtime. Calgary just threw the kitchen sink at them, and it worked. And it was just a very startling sort of ebbs and flows kind of game. And when Edmonton tied it, I thought they'd get the upper hand back, but it was
Well, I
quite the
imagine when Gretzky
reverse.
scored in the final minute of the game, the
Yes,
building probably erupted.
bedlam.
But
I mean, any
unfortunately, not the
tie,
right
but
result on that night.
no.
Uh,
Give Calgary credit; they were by far the better team in overtime. They were just on it, and then Edmonton was on the back foot.
yeah. And moving on to game 3, I mean, it was another tight, close game. Just like we said, they came back, forced the game to overtime, lost, and then coming out in game 3, this time the Oilers got one back on them, though, Bruce.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they tightened things up in that. This was in the Saddle Dome, and you got to remember back in these days, it was the Saddle Dome. They would start playoff series with back-to-back games in one building, one day off, then back-to-back games in the other building. So it was like 4 and 5 days, and same for both teams. So fair in that respect, but the hockey sometimes got a little bit ragged. But in this game, just 3-2, so a very low scoring game by standards of these two teams. And it was Paul Coffey that scored a couple. Here, I'm just looking at the penalty summary again. Dave Semenko fighting, charging, Jim Paplinski roughing, Don Jackson roughing. There they go again. Charlie Bourgeois, that would be the guy Semenko fought. And there was another Coffey and Risebrough fought. McClelland and Bourgeois again, they fought. That's a typical go back to Calgary and be prepared to drop the gloves. But in the end, it was one of my favorite players, Yaroslav Pozar, who netted the game winner set up by line mates Curry and Gretzky. That staked the Oilers to a 3-1 lead, and then Lanny McDonald scored to cut the margin, but Calgary just couldn't close from there, and Edmonton hung on and won a 3-2 victory.
Yeah, just another one of those games. I'm looking at it right now. 70 combined penalty minutes, 3 fights in the game. It's like you said, it always just seemed to boil over as soon as they got back down south.
Yeah, and 35 saves for Grant Fuhr was a big part of that one as well.
Yeah. And going into game 4, it was Dave Hunter who recorded his first career playoff multi-goal game, and Mark Messier, who scored the game-winning goal with 9 seconds into the third period to lift the Oilers to a 5-3 road win and a 3-1 series lead. Bruce, Messier's goal would have to be one of the fastest, if not the fastest goal to start a period in Oilers history. Do you recall anything about it? How was it scored? And do you actually know offhand if it is the record?
Well, it may well be the playoff record. The regular season record for fastest was 8 seconds, held by one Wayne Gretzky.
That was broke a couple years ago, I think.
It just recently got tied. Did it get tied? I think it got.
No,
tied.
I think.
Who the heck was it now?
Leon Draisaitl's German buddy, who came in for a year.
Toby Reeder?
No.
Kubel. No, Dominic Cahoon.
Yes.
Cahoon.
He broke it in the I think the second pandemic shortened season, I believe.
Uh-huh. Yeah, well, there you go. I remember the 1980s better than I remember the 2020s, Eric, and that's a sad fact.
But yeah, I mean, great to see a guy like Dave Hunter have a 2-goal game. I don't believe he had too many of those, especially in the playoffs. And for Messier to come through in the clutch, like I said, just right off the third period to get the goal that held up as the eventual game winner.
Yeah, well, Hunter opened and closed the scoring, with the latter being an empty net goal. But this game, it was somewhat similar to Game 3 in that, it was a hard-fought back-and-forth game. Oilers opened a 2-goal lead early in the third, and again, Lanny McDonald scored to cut it to 1. And sort of the whole third period was played with Edmonton hanging on to a 1-goal lead, so it was tense. And this time, at least, I got the empty netter to make the last 30 seconds a little more breathable. But it was, it was a hard-fought win. And when they won both games 3 and 4 in Calgary to go up 3-1. It seemed then that they'd be home and cooled out, but
Yeah, and just like the previous, just like the previous spring, the Oilers returned home for Game 5 against the Flames, looking to wrap up the series. However, the Flames went up 4-1 early in the second period and survived a late charge by the Oilers to keep the series alive. Bruce, the game wasn't even at the halfway point when Grant Fuhr was pulled in favor of Andy Moog. Do you think that switch had more to do with Sather just waking up his team more than anything else?
let's see if I got it right here. So Fuhr stopped. He allowed all the goals in this game. Yeah. So yeah. Well, when you're losing 5-2 and your goalie is stopped 5 out of 19 after 2 valiant efforts in Calgary, he just didn't have it that night.
Yeah.
And Moog came in. Of course, Calgary was a little bit more defensive with what we nowadays would call score effects. They're the team with the lead, meaning they don't have to score. They're just
sitting back on it
they
now.
need to defend and put their efforts there, and then maybe you're going to get stuff on the counterattack. But in this case, the Oilers kept coming, but they could not ever close the gap. And this was a rare pointless game from Wayne Gretzky, which I guess credit to Calgary for holding him off the sheet, but he wasn't at his best in this particular game.
Yeah. And in Game 6, it was a back and forth affair, and the Flames led 4 separate times, but the Oilers also evened the score 4 times as well, sending this one to overtime. And Bruce, just like in Game 2, the extra session didn't last long.
And it didn't end well either. It was Lanny McDonald with his 6th goal, and he was really smashing them in. He opened the scoring in this game, and it was a weird kind of sloppy game, as I recall. Each team scored a shorty. There was a few power play goals, not a lot going on at even strength. And McDonald, he took a low shot coming in off the wing from sort of bottom of the circle, and I still don't know how it got in and through Grant Fuhr, but it did. And that was the decider in that game. And of course, the Saddle Dome was in bedlam as that happened. Lanny McDonald was a big hero in Calgary for a good reason, but he was a real big hero that night.
And Bruce, after watching the Oilers 3-1 series lead evaporate, how nervous were you as you made your way to Northlands for Game 7 that year?
I was nervous. The concern was that Edmonton had, they got to the Stanley Cup Finals and lost the year before. They'd been, they bowed out of the playoffs in a shocking upset the year before that. And the general feeling was it's time, and the sort of the subtext by the media of the day, some of whom are still the media in these parts, was that if somehow they were to lose that game to Calgary, that the team might be sort of not ripped asunder, but sort of significant changes made to the team. We didn't want that because, of course, we thought we had a pretty good team. And the feeling was that contrary to the defense wins championships mantra then and now, that this team was such a massive offensive force that they could outscore their mistakes, which is basically exactly what they did in Game 4 or Game 7, which they won 7-4. And this was a huge test for Edmonton. I think this series going 7 was a blessing in disguise because Edmonton surviving this sort of pressure cooker winner take all one game showdown and pulling it out in the fashion that they did was a big push towards them being able to deliver in the pressure cooker that was to occur in the Stanley Cup Finals later that spring. And this game, they started Andy Moog after Fuhr had started the first 6 game. They started Moog, and I thought I would have started him in Game 6. It's almost identical situation with what happened to Boston Bruins this last spring when they stuck with Linus Ullmark in game when they lost Game 5 and 6, and then
refused to put in the backup.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, they started Moog in Game 7, and wouldn't you know, he gave up 3 goals on 10 shots. I think 3 goals on 8 shots. There you go. Edmonton was out shooting Calgary, and then Fuhr came in halfway through the second when Calgary tied it up 3-3 midway in the second. And Fuhr came in, and one of the first shots he allowed was a goal. And I still remember looking at that shot clock in disbelief because Edmonton was out shooting Calgary 30-10 and trailing 4-3. And you're thinking, boy, this, we're going to need a save or two to make this happen. And as good as the game start was, where the Oilers scored 2 goals in the first 10 minutes, that things had gone sideways in a hurry. And then Edmonton just took over the back half of the second period, and they pounded home 3 goals, and then a fourth in the first minute of the third to take the 7-4 lead. That they just checked the crap out of Calgary the whole rest of the way, and they really bore down and played the kind of two-way hockey that they were going to need to play. And it was Anderson, Linsman, Curry, and ultimately Hughes who scored those goals. And the Anderson goal I saw just the other day. I don't know why they were showing something to do with Anderson or Gretzky of Wayne. It was just a break-in at the blue line that was almost offside, and he had to hold the puck outside the line while somebody cleared, and then he had to sort of control the puck right along the blue line. It was just one of these unbelievable stick handling in a phone booth, and all of a sudden he slipped the pass through to Anderson, who was just steaming in. And he bombed a slap shot home to tie the game, and that was a huge relief. Like trailing on the scoreboard at any time is unsettling, and when it's a Game 7, all the more so. And just stabilizing the game at 4-4, but they jumped right on top of that with another goal within a minute, and then and just gradually seized control. And it was Edmonton's response to really being in a difficult situation that, to me, it set the stage. This was a hugely important win in 1984. Not just the obvious that, well, if they lose, they're out, and that, but the way that they responded within that game when things weren't going their way, to just say, nope, not this time. We're just taking this game away from you, and we're winning it. And they basically won going away.
Yeah. And Bruce, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I mean, that second period had to have been the most stressful and ultimately exhilarating period of hockey for Oilers fans all season.
It was all of those things. And I mean, Edmonton was the better team throughout the game. They just weren't getting the goals for the first part of it, and then they just raised the temperature on the Flames that much more to assert dominance, frankly, in the final 30 minutes.
Yeah. And of course, after knocking off the Flames in 7 games, the Oilers went on to sweep the Minnesota North Stars in the Campbell Conference Final, and then ultimately beat the 4-time defending Stanley Cup champion New York Islanders in 5 games to capture their first Stanley Cup in franchise history. So that spring had a very happy ending. And of course, any doubts that you were mentioning there about potentially making changes to the roster would have obviously been washed away at that point.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And that ultimate triumph. But Edmonton only lost 4 games in their Stanley Cup run that year, and 3 of them were in that one series to Calgary. Like, the Flames were the toughest team Edmonton played. I mean, the Islanders in theory were, but the Islanders were a little more beat up, and the Oilers were surging.
But I'm sure if someone would have told you in March before the playoffs started that the Flames would put up a tougher test than the Islanders would, I'm sure that would have shocked you.
Yes. Yeah. Well, the Islanders they'd played 4 cups in a row at that point. So 4 years in a row, they played 4 playoff series, and it was kind of a miracle that they got through the East. But by the time they did, they were playing their 20th playoff series in 5 years, having won 19 in a row before the Oilers finally took them out. So when Edmonton beat them 1-0 in the first game in New York, that was that was a huge moment. And New York won the second game, but they came back by the rule of the day for 3 in Edmonton, and the Oilers took them out in each of the games. 2 of them being blowouts, and they just were able to raise their game to a level that even the wonderful New York Islanders, banged up as they were, just couldn't match.
All right, after a 2-year absence, the Oilers and Flames faced each other again in the 1986 Smythe Division Final. The Oilers were the 2-time defending Stanley Cup champions and had just been crowned the first ever President's Trophy winners in 1985-86, finishing with 119 points that season, 30 points ahead of the rival Flames. And after the Oilers fell behind 2-0 early on in Game 1, Dave Semenko pummeled Joel Otto in a fight and also received a game misconduct. But on the offensive side of things, Edmonton didn't have much going on that night, Bruce.
No, they sure didn't. This was a turning point in the rivalry that Edmonton had owned Calgary and beat them for fun in the regular season in between times. In 86, 86, they were like 6-0-1 against Calgary, and they met up in the last week of the season in Calgary, and the Flames just pounded Edmonton 9-3. The rookie Gary Suter, I think he had 6 points in that game, and everything went Calgary's way just before the playoffs, and it just seemed to change the Flames, frankly, in terms of their level of confidence against the Oilers. And after both teams had made mincemeat of their opponents in the first round series, Edmonton beat Vancouver by 4 goals 3 times in a row. They met up in round 2, and as easy as the first round had been, and the Oilers were 2-time defending champions, they weren't prepared for the Calgary blitzkrieg that opened Game 1. The Flames got 2 goals. They scored in the 2nd minute and again in the 8th minute. And from there, they rolled to a 4-1 win. Edmonton got 1 goal late in the second period on the power play, 12 seconds left. It seemed to set the stage for the good third, and then Calgary came out, and good old Joe Mullen, who Cliff Fletcher had stolen from St. Louis at the trade deadline, instantly scored in the first minute of the third to restore the 2-goal lead, and they cruised 4-1. And it was an uninspiring and frankly very disappointing game, other than if you liked fighting, you got to see all of Dave Semenko and Marty McSorley and Kevin McClellan drop the gloves in the same game. So this was one where the home team kind of lost their cool a little bit, and it was a pretty it was a rugged affair, but it was not the greatest hockey game.
And despite the loss in Game 1, Wayne Gretzky broke Dennis Potvin's NHL record for most career playoff assists with 103. And then in Game 2, the Oilers found themselves playing from behind once again as the Flames took a 4-2 lead into the third period. But the Oilers stormed back in the final frame, setting up an exciting finish.
Yeah, it was kind of the reverse of the Calgary overtime win in 84 in Game 2, where this time it was the Oilers who trailed in by 2 goals in the third, and they pumped home 3 in a row. They took a lead with 3.5 minutes to play, and Calgary this time, good old Joe Mullen scored to tie it up. Not sure if the goalie was on the bench yet. This was 1840, so in those days they often waited till the last minute of play announcement to yank the stopper, and I can't recall for sure. I do know obviously Calgary was pressing down, so it was they who sort of stemmed the tide with a tying goal, and already Oilers trailing 1-0 in the series. You're thinking the worst, but the overtime was short-lived, and Edmonton seized the moment with Glenn Anderson scoring a overtime winner just 1 minute and 4 seconds into the extra frame to send the Oilers home. One thing I remember about this overtime goal was after it was scored, the filthy Paul Baxter of Calgary just brutally cross-checked Paul Coffey to the ice. I mean, the game was over. He was mad, and he just took it out on the nearest Oiler that happened to be Coffey, and there was just not thing one done or really to be done about it. It was just a statement from Calgary that even in defeat, they were going to be nasty about it, and they had a particularly nasty defense crew that year with Paul Baxter, with Neil Sheehy, a player I especially hated, a trash-talking, cheap-shotting D-man with a Harvard education, knew what he was doing. And they also had Gary Suter, who had was just beginning his to establish his reputation as a pretty filthy guy with the stick. So that was an easy Calgary team to hate, gotta say. And losing, as they ultimately did in this series, left a very bitter taste, which frankly remains.
No doubt about it. And I think when you say Gary Suter's name, for a lot of people from that era who would remember this, the 1991 Canada Cup incident between he and Gretzky is one that still stings to watch for anyone who's ever seen it.
Yeah, he caused Gretzky's back injury during an exhibition tournament, and it was just a vicious cross-check from behind into the boards, and just filthy. He was also the guy who cross-checked Paul Correa in the face
right before the
after he
Olympics.
Scored, and put him out for a long period of time, like a real dirty player. Anyway, a good player, like he was a skilled player, but an easy player to detest.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And in Game 3 down in Calgary, the Flames opened the scoring for the third straight contest and never trailed all night as they picked up another close 3-2 win at the Saddledome and took a 2-1 series lead. Bruce, did the Flames implement any special defensive tactics to go up against the high-flying Oilers that year? And if so, did Glenn Sather do anything or make any adjustments to counteract the Flames' defensive schemes?
He did, and they didn't work. And yes, this was Badger Bob's 7-point plan to beating the Oilers. And of course, Cliff Fletcher had instituted the first point in the plan the previous summer when he somehow convinced the NHL that 4 versus 4 was not exciting hockey to watch. And therefore, we better get rid of it so we could just go 5-on-5 all the time. I'm still bitter about that too, because it was such a regressive rule change.
You think about how many more goals a team like the Oilers would have scored had those offsetting minors, not resulted in just 5-on-5.
Calgary was free to goon it up without having, fear of any kind of
extra open ice for Gretzky to work his magic.
Yeah. So, and for a few years thereafter, especially when I was at a live game, anytime there was a double minor called and the subsequent lines came out and it was still 5-on-5, I would just look at the two teams and say, who's the fifth guy? Who's the guy that they put out there that wouldn't be out if it was 4-on-4? And they might not put the same lines at all, of course, but it would be, the defensive forward, the Dave Hunter for Edmonton, or the Colin Patterson for Calgary. The ice clogger, the high forward. On 4-on-4, there's no high forward. You come down one end and you break the puck back the other way, and it's two guys back frequently. And when your guy breaking is Paul Coffey and he's rushing with Wayne Gretzky and Yari Curry, or with Glenn Anderson, and
there's a pretty good chance the puck's going to end up in the other team's net.
Good things are going to happen. So anyway, Cliff Fletcher convinced the league to do away with that, the Edmonton Oilers rule. So there's that. Bob Johnson came up with a 7-point plan, and a key to it was to clog up the offensive right side for the Oilers. He noticed, he was well aware of the fact that 4 of Edmonton's big 5 were left shots, and that all of them like to come roll in off of the right wing boards and cut into the middle. And his plan was to make that more difficult for them to do. The Oilers' lone right shot, Yari Curry, he sort of made his living sort of hanging out in he'd be the high forward in the best defensive position, but he would also be, often even as a right winger, set up on the left face-off circle in the offensive zone and take a feed from Gretzky, Coffey, coming from the right to the left. And in that series, Curry was basically reduced to, the guy who led the NHL playoffs in scoring in the 2 years before and the 2 years after. Scored just 2 goals in the playoffs, and I think just one in that series. And he was a big part of the reason was the Calgary game plan. And Sather's response to it, I thought was frankly a mistake, in that he broke up Gretzky and Curry, and he put Curry with Messier and Gretzky with Anderson. I just didn't think that was as effective as just simply playing through and
eventually the Oilers' skill would have found their way through.
Well, it's hindsight, but at the time I thought when they switched him out in Game 6, I think it was, and I don't like this. So anyway, it's Bob Johnson. His tactics won the series. I mean, credit where due.
And we will get there in a minute. But first, in Game 4, Wayne Gretzky scored his 7th career playoff hat trick and 5 points as the Oilers beat the Flames 7-4 and knotted up the series 2-2 on the road. Gretzky also equaled Maurice Richard's NHL record for most career playoff hat tricks. Bruce, after putting up just 4 points in his first 3 games in the series, did you get the sense it was only a matter of time before Gretzky had a big night offensively?
100%. Like, it was, before a playoff series started in those days, you'd think, well, there's going to be one of the games in the series at least where Gretzky's basically going to put up enough offense on his own, or, be in the middle of enough offense with his line mates to win a game on his own. Sure enough, he got 5 points and Calgary got 4 goals. So that's a recipe for success. And he was he was that was the one game in this series where he did break through and dominate. Scored he set up a shorty by Curry. He scored a shorty himself to close out the scoring in the third period, and he was classic Gretzky, dangerous in all game states. Got a power play goal, even strength goal, and shorthanded goal.
Not a bad night for the great one. And in Game 5 back in Edmonton, Gretzky netted his league-leading 8th goal of the playoffs to tie the game 1-1 in the second period. But that was the only time the Oilers were able to solve rookie netminder Mike Vernon on that night, as he held the Oilers to 2 or fewer goals for the 3rd time in the series and backstopped the Flames to a 4-1 win on the road and a 3-2 series lead. Bruce, this is the first time the Oilers had been on the brink of elimination since Game 7 against the Flames 2 years earlier. But were you still confident that the Oilers' star snipers would be able to step up at this crucial point in the series?
I was getting pretty damn nervous by this point, Eric. I mean, Calgary was playing well. They had a formula, and they were, they didn't have the speed of Edmonton, but what they had was like 100% commitment, and like in the sort of short races to the puck, there would be, the Calgary guys would be going hard and battling hard, and there was just no easy battles to be won, unlike 83 in particular, or 84 to a lesser extent. This Calgary team was, they were just giving her. They were well prepared. They were a good team. They had a lot of good players on that team, and they were proving mighty hard to get through. I mean, the fact that, as you mentioned already, and it's going to happen again, all of the Calgary wins in this series, Edmonton scored 2 or 1 goal. And this one in Game 5, I just remember the hopeless feeling watching the clock ticking down in the third period, Calgary leading 3-1, and it just didn't seem like the Oilers had any sort of answers for it. They were just working the clock down, finally got an empty netter to put it away. But Calgary, as in Game 1 in Edmonton, just clearly the better team on the night. I'm still not convinced they were the better team on the series, which was basically dead even. But on this particular night, they had it going on, and they just play the kitty bar of the door, and make it tough to enter the zone, and clog up the slot, and don't give anything free around the net.
And with the series shifting back to Calgary for Game 6, the Flames were looking to finally knock off the Oilers on home ice. And they started fast with 2 goals in the first 6 minutes of the game. But Bruce, the Oilers wouldn't go down without a fight in this game.
No, they would not. And the scoreboard ultimately said 5-2 Edmonton, but it was a very, very tight game. They fought back within that second period after Calgary went up 2-0 halfway through the second. It was 5 alarm time. But they got goals from Tikkanen, and then another shorty, from Mark Messier to tie it up in the second. And then in the third, Glenn Anderson with another one of his standard huge clutch goals put them ahead 3-2. And it was 3-2 right into the last half minute of the third before Mike Krushelnyski popped one into the empty net. And then just in the dying garbage time seconds that remained, Craig McTavish scored to stretch it out to 5-2. But this was not like a blowout win by any stretch, like Game 4 or Game 5. Game 4 had been in Calgary. Edmonton won 2 of their 3 games in Calgary in this series, and Calgary won 3 of their 4 games in Edmonton. It was not a home ice series at all.
No. And back at home for Game 7, the Oilers were looking to advance to the Campbell Conference Final for the 4th consecutive year. Down by 1 in the second period, Jim Poplinski scored a goal to pad the Flames' lead on kind of a fluky long-range shot. But as the Oilers had done all series, they responded when facing a deficit, as Glenn Anderson and Mark Messier each scored to tie the game 2-2 after 40 minutes. And Bruce, you can explain what happened after that.
Yeah, the fluke by Poplinski doesn't get enough play. Everybody remembers the one by Berezan, but Calgary actually got 2 flukes in this game. My recollection of the Poplinski goal was that Grant Fuhr made the save and the puck just popped way up in the air and somehow came down, and I'd hit something and went in the net. And you're going, no, this is not, because that made it 2-0. But as you mentioned, Anderson from Gretzky, Messier from Curry on the new lines scored the goals that tied it up late in the second. And then in the third, well, what can I say? Steve Smith playing on his 23rd birthday, as many pointed out after the fact, was ultimately ruled the GOAT in this game, although it was kind of just such a weird play where he came out beside his own net, saw Anderson on what was for him the far boards on the right wing, passed it through his own goal crease, where Grant Fuhr wasn't tight to the post, and the puck hit the back of his leg and bounced into the net. And that gave Calgary the lead again at 3-2, and there the score remained. I also have a recollection of a play later. This was at the far end for me, so I didn't see it as well, of Neil Sheehy doing something very similar and banking a puck in his own end that could have went in but didn't. And that was basically the difference. And I have to admit, Eric, that 37 years later, I have resisted every opportunity to watch a replay of that game. I can't take it.
You've seen the goal on, like, at least
the
that
goal.
play.
You can't avoid seeing the goal.
Right.
The game you can, and I have avoided watching it again. I just still leaves a bitter taste.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't born at the time, but I can only imagine how crushing of a defeat that must have been for Oilers fans.
Calgary? Oh. And that was at that point we had dreams of matching or beating Montreal's record of 5 cups in a row. And in fact, they won 4 out of 5. That was the one they didn't get. And, just on. But on balance, I mean, the odd thing about this series, Calgary never trailed in the series. Never trailed in the series. They won the first, third, fifth, and seventh games, and in all 4 of the games that they won, they never trailed within those games. They were tied up a couple times, but never did Edmonton have a tie series and a lead in the game. The only games they led in were the games where they were trailing in the series and had to win that game just to tie it back up again. Of course, there was no game 8, so
And
ultimately it came crashing to a sordid end.
A tough break for what, like we said, they tied the franchise record for points in the regular season.
Yeah.
Wayne Gretzky had his best offensive season in the NHL that year. They just seemed destined to win their third straight cup. But and Bruce, the Oilers have lost in the Stanley Cup final twice in franchise history, in 1983 and 2006. But was Game 7 against the Flames in 1986 the most painful loss you have ever experienced as an Oilers fan?
Yeah, the one in Carolina certainly hurt pretty bad. Basically a 2-1 game in Game 7. But
for me, that's the most painful.
That playoff run. But yeah, I never felt worse after a game than April 30th, 1986. That was just devastating. It was not a good time.
All right. The Battle of Alberta would heat up again, though, in the 1988 Smythe Division final. At that time, the Oilers were the reigning Stanley Cup champions after recapturing the cup in 1987. However, the Flames won the President's Trophy in 1987-88, giving them home ice advantage in a playoff series against the Oilers for the first time. Bruce, even though Edmonton won back the cup in 1987, were Oilers fans still dying to get revenge for the last Battle of Alberta in 86?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And the series started in Calgary and would end in Edmonton. But it was it was a mission. This was the first year Edmonton didn't win first place in their division in 7 years. It's the first year Wayne Gretzky didn't win the scoring title in 8 years. And it was and the Oilers were tagged as the underdogs entering the series. And I remember thinking, well, it's nice being underdogs when you got like Wayne Gretzky, Eric Friesen, Mark Messier, Brent Anderson, newcomer Craig Simpson on your team, Estetik, and then the Oilers' top 6 was absolutely phenomenal, and they needed to dial it up a little bit, and they got into the point where the regular season was, it was a tune-up as opposed to, we want to go all out, and so their offensive totals were down a bit. Calgary's were actually up. Calgary had some very good goal scorers of their own. They had, Hack and Lube and Mike Buller, Joe Newendike was on that team. And so it was, it was expected to be a high scoring series, but right from the get-go in Game 1, the Oilers were, it was a very intense game, and it was a tight game, 1-1.
Let's get into that game
deep
now.
Deep into the third period. Yeah, I'm doing just that.
Yeah.
And it was 1-1 deep into the third period in Calgary when Jari Kurri scored, set up by Estetik to put the Oilers ahead. And then 3 minutes later, Wayne Gretzky scored from Kurri and Tikkanen to make it 3-1. And just like there's still a few minutes left in the game, but when Gretzky scored, there was a large number of Calgary fans that just couldn't handle it, and they just got up and left. And I still remember Rod Phillips crowing about how Gretzky, they had what they called the Sea of Red in Calgary with all the fans wearing red. And when Gretzky scored that goal, and Rod Phillips was chortling, Gretzky just parted the Red Sea.
That's a good line.
He'd do it again in Game 2 as well. But Game 1 was a 3-1 win, and it was just standard Edmonton Calgary, a bunch of penalties in each period, and just hard fought, lots of hitting, lots of animosity, hockey, Battle of Alberta.
And, aside from, Gretzky getting that insurance marker on the breakaway from center ice in, and Kurri having another multi-point game. One fact that I was interested to find out from that game is that the Oilers actually went 8 for 9 on the penalty kill.
Mm-hmm.
And, for a team like the Oilers that was obviously such an offensive juggernaut during the 1980s, would you call that one of their best defensive efforts in the playoffs during their glory years?
Well, I'll default to the 1-0 win over New York in Islanders in
that would probably be
game
at the
one
top.
in '84. But yeah, the Oilers had the capacity to dial up the defensive game when they really needed it, and typically on the road. There was a huge 3-1 win in Philadelphia in the '85
Why do
Stanley
you think
Cup
that was on the
Finals.
road always?
They like to put on a show at home,
Okay.
and on the road they sometimes just let's just stick to
What about
business and get the
Yeah.
job done. And especially because all this talk about all Calgary's goal scorers and that. Well, Brad McCrimmon scored for the late Sarge. Brad McCrimmon scored for Calgary, not exactly a goal scorer. And Edmonton responded with goals by Mark Messier, Yari Curry, and Wayne Gretzky. And I think statements were being made at both ends of the ice there in that 3-1 game one victory.
Yeah. And in game two, the Oilers trailed 4-3 with just over 4 minutes to play in the third period before Yari Curry deked through two opponents and fired home a slap shot off the rush, sending the game to overtime and setting the stage for one of the most famous goals in Oilers history.
Yeah, this was a game. Edmonton trailed 2-0, 3-1, 4-3. They got goals from Messier, Charlie Huddy, who we talked about earlier. Gretzky tied at 3-3. Curry tied at 4-4. And the game went into OT, and it was back and forth. Messier took a tripping penalty just before the 6-minute mark of overtime, and it was white knuckle time as a potent Calgary power play took to the ice with Al McGuinness and Gary Suter on the points. And the various guys I mentioned earlier up front in the form of Mike Bullard, Hack and Lube, Joe Mullen, Lanny McDonald, and they had John Tonelli by this point, and they really were a potent force. But near the end of the power play, there was the puck came into Edmonton's end and bounced over to Yari Curry, and Curry picked the puck up, and basically with one touch, he just bumped a perfectly weighted pass off the wall to not just clear the zone, but put the puck right in the track of Gretzky, who was coming up the left side of the ice on the penalty kill, and where he laid such a hurt on Calgary, specifically shorthanded the whole time that he was involved in this rivalry. And this was, in fact, his last game as an Oiler in Calgary. And he would end it in the greatest possible fashion by taking that puck, steaming up the wing, and hammering a perfect slap shot, basically through the crook of Mike Vernon's elbow and up under the crossbar and down to send the Oilers home with a 5-4 win and a 2-0 series lead.
Bruce, Wayne Gretzky scored 664 goals combined in the regular season and playoffs in an Oilers uniform. In your opinion, where does his overtime winner in Game 2 against the Flames rank among his most memorable goals with the Edmonton Oilers?
Goals? Yeah. I'd have to think pretty much number one. It was
even ahead of 50 and 39.
Well, the 50th and 39 was that was a big goal. It was a big game and a 5-goal night, empty net goal to hit the record. But in terms of meaningful goals, this scoring in overtime, shorthanded, against the first place President's Trophy winning Flames. It was sort of the feature moment of what was to become a 4-game sweep. This is the moment people remember, and with reason. And it was not just what the goal meant, but the way it was scored, with him streaking down the ice and just bombing a perfect slap shot under the crossbar. It's just such a dramatic end. I still have this was the weird year where they had both networks covering the games. And so you had CBC and CTV, and they were both showing it. And only one of the the replays that are available on YouTube don't show this, but the TV at the time did. And Gretzky, after he scored and after the team celebrated, and they were going off the ice, and there was a kid behind the Oilers bench with a blue paint on his face, Oilers fan. He would literally yelled himself hoarse. They had a microphone right there, and you could barely
Gretzky
hear
hand him
the
a
kid.
stick?
And Gretzky stopped and handed the stick to the kid over the glass. And one of the channels switched away to show the replay, but the other channel showed the fullness of the exchange. And what I remember is the Gretzky stick with the baby powder. He used to sprinkle his stick with baby powder so he could have a smooth touch. The puck wouldn't get jammed up in his tape or anything. And you could see the mark on the stick where he'd shot the puck. There was a puck-sized dark mark in the baby powder where he slapped it. He handed the stick to this kid, and the kid was just, oh, whoa, and he was behind the bench. You could barely, and he was absolutely thrilled beyond belief. And why wouldn't he be? His hero had just scored to beat the dastardly Flames and given him the game-winning stick, right? It wasn't just any stick. I mean, and that was quite the moment.
Unbelievable. I'm sure that kid today, who would probably be in his 40s, I'm sure will still remember that and tell that story.
Yeah, somewhere along the way, I talked to somebody who knew that kid on Twitter,
Oh, yeah?
like years later, and said, "Yeah, that kid was my neighbor or some darn thing." Anyway, it was it did come up as in the sort of personal sense of someone that actually knew the guy and indeed treasured the stick.
Oh, undoubtedly. Yeah. And after Gretzky scored the overtime winner, head coach Glenn Sather turned around and gave the Flames fans at the Saddle Dome a special salute, didn't he, Bruce?
He did. Yeah. There was some shenanigans going on behind the bench, but throughout. But Sather was, he was known for being a bit of an irascible character behind the bench. He'd get into it with the fans from time to time, but he did a double fist pump. He did one towards the ice, and then he turned around and gave a fist pump, not with the finger, but it could have had a finger. It was sort of the same kind of upward thrusting, just a fist pump. We'll call it a fist pump. But it had a little juice in it.
And Bruce, I think you told this story on a previous podcast you and I did together, but didn't Sather say something in his post-game availability to the media about you might as well take the ice out because there won't be any more hockey?
He did say just that to the crew after the game, to the ice crew. And said just exactly as you just put it. Might as well take the ice out. We're not coming back.
And you love to hear that.
Well, they got to back it up, but they did.
Oh, and I'm sure like the way that series ended, definitely erased some of the demons, at least from '86. And we'll move on to Game 3 now. And after taking both games on the road to open the series, Jari Kurri extended his goal streak to 5 games, and Mark Messier notched 3 assists to lift the Oilers to a 4-2 win at Northlands Coliseum and a 3-0 stranglehold in the series. But what many fans will remember most about this game was Marty McSorley viciously spearing Mike Bullard in the gut. Bruce, what sort of an impact did that incident have on the rest of the game and the rest of the series, for that matter?
Well, it wasn't good. This was the one where McSorley had taken a hard hit along the boards, and he claimed that he himself had sort of taken a blow to the head and just kind of lost lost his mind in a literal sense for a period of time. Anyway, the Oilers had just scored to take the lead. The penalty, I noticed, at the same time as the goal, 8:54 of the second, where Charlie Huddy scored to give the Oilers the lead. This after Steve Smith, himself seeking vengeance against the Flames, had scored the tying goal. Anyway, McSorley gave Bullard the business end of his stick, and Bullard went down like shot, and I think carried off on a stretcher, if I recall. And and it certainly added an extra nasty edge to what was already a fairly vicious rivalry. And he not Marty's greatest moment.
Right.
This is the rivalry. I can't remember if this was the game. Might have been where Doug Risebrough got a hold of McSorley's sweater. I think this was a game where somehow they've been a brawl or something. Got a hold of his sweater in the penalty box and just shredded it with his skates in the penalty box. Yeah, these guys did not like one another.
Yeah, I can imagine just from the stories you hear about it. You'd hear things like there would be charity events in the summer that the Flames and Oilers would be involved in, and they couldn't even sit in the same side of the room at like a golf course dinner because the hatred was that intense.
Yeah, that's and years later they got over it, but it was quite a few years after all the main combatants have retired that they could sort of get together for an old timers game and have a beer together after,
And actually, that's one thing that I'm disappointed about for the Heritage Classic this weekend is that we won't be getting an alumni game. And I don't think they really gave a solid explanation why. But, I mean, for me, thinking back to that original Heritage Classic in 2003, I was 14 years old at the time. So because I was born 5 months after the Gretzky trade, that was the first time that I had ever got to see the Glory Days Oilers all together on the ice. And even though they were all retired by that point, except for Mark Messier, it was still such a special moment for me to see the Oilers all-time greats back on the ice. And I'm sure they would have went with a younger group of alumni if they would have had one this year. But I'm disappointed they decided not to do that.
I would have liked to have seen the alumni of the 06 Oilers play the 04 Flames.
Yeah,
it's
I
the
think that would
core
have
of
been a
the
great
two
idea.
teams that went to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals in consecutive seasons, with, of course, the lockout having occurred in between that completely ended the 04-05 season before it began. But 2 seasons in a row, the Alberta teams went to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals, and they both were good teams. Like that would be it would be unreasonable to expect, 62-year-old Wayne Gretzky or Mark Messier to play in this game, but those guys would all be in their 40s, and it would have been all right. But anyway, I guess there was no appetite for it.
Well, I mean, I from the fans I've talked to, I know that a lot of people wanted to see it. So there
was appetite for it in the fan base.
Yeah, but not from the organization. Yeah. But your idea of I actually had a guest on the podcast a while back when we were still discussing the possibility of this game, and basically he said the same thing. The 04 Flames versus the 06 Oilers sounds like a great idea for an alumni game. And I said to him, I'm sure it would start off as a friendly game, but if it was tied 3-3 in the second period, I feel like a little more competitive edge would start to come out at that point.
Oh yeah.
And just going back to that series in '88 now, in Game 4, 6 different Oilers skaters scored as Edmonton won the game 6-4 and swept the Flames 4-0. Bruce, the Oilers just had too much firepower and from too many of the world's best players for the Flames to handle in this series, didn't they?
Well, yeah, they did. I mean, and you just have to look at the goal scorers for Edmonton: Mark Messier, Craig Simpson, Wayne Gretzky, Estikinen, Dave Hannon. There's the one guy from the bottom of the lineup scored from Anderson and Messier, mind. And then Glenn Anderson himself scoring the 6-3 goal that turned out to be pretty important when Calgary got a late one. And got multiple power plays down the stretch of this game. So they called Grant Fuhr. I still remember how this game ended. It was 6-4. Seemed comfortable enough. They called Grant Fuhr for a stick measurement and won the measure. So he got a legal stick penalty with 2 minutes to go. And then Steve Smith took a slashing penalty on the penalty kill. And it was so Oilers had 2 men in the box, and Calgary pulled the goalie, and they had a 6-on-3 for the last 61 seconds of the series. 6-on-3. You almost never see it.
No, and even though the Oilers were up 3-0 in the series, I'm sure you thought, we don't want to see this go to overtime.
Yeah, no, we did not want to see it go to overtime. And 1:01 is a long time for 3 against 6. And I still remember the two with Smith in the penalty box. The two defensemen Edmonton relied on in that situation were none other than Randy Gregg and Charlie Huddy that they put out. And the forwards, I think they used probably both Messier and McTavish. But I sat behind the Oilers defensive net nervously and just watching those guys standing tall. And after they cleared the zone, I think the second time there was 20 seconds left, and you're sort of finally going, well, I don't think they can, sort of mathematically do it anymore. But that was a pucker up sequence of that ended that series, even though the score didn't change from 6-4, and they somehow managed to see it out, but not without some nervous. At least possibilities, and the penalty kill was sensational.
Yeah, and the Oilers would go on to win their 4th Stanley Cup in 5 years in 1988. It was also the last for Wayne Gretzky with the Oilers, as he was traded to the Los Angeles Kings that summer. And 3 years later, the Battle of Alberta would be renewed in the 1991 Smythe Division semifinal in what was also a matchup of the past 2 Stanley Cup winning teams. And in Game 1, Al MacInnis unloaded a heavy shot to put the Flames in front 1-0. But it was the only puck that got past Grant Fuhr on that night, Bruce.
Yeah, this game was stands out in memory for its viciousness. These two teams came out and they just made mincemeat of one another right from the start. Very, very heavy checking, lots of hard stick work. And I'm just pulling up the game log now, but it was first round of the series. This was the first time that they didn't play in the Smythe Division final, but L.A. Wayne Gretzky's L.A. Kings had won the division, and Edmonton were second, third, playing each other, and they had kind of a new cast of characters, and that kind of shows up in the scoring summary from this game. Esa Tikkanen tied the score. Peter Klima gave the Oilers the lead, and then Craig Simpson clinched it in the third period. And, that was sort of the new wave of Oilers attackers. And Tikkanen and Klima in particular were great clutch goal scorers in the playoffs in the later part of the Edmonton run. And of course, they won their last cup by this time, but they still were going to go win the Smythe Division for 2 more years before finally the midnight struck.
And in Game 2, Mike Vernon turned aside 35 of 36 shots, including Glenn Anderson and Mark Messier on a pair of breakaways to tie the series at 1 apiece. Bruce, was that just one of those nights where you have to tip your hat to the opposing goalie?
Yeah, it was. I mean, Calgary got the lead this time, and again, Calgary started the series at home, and they were the favorite team. And it was basically, there was a flurry of goals early in the second that made it 3-1, and it just stayed there, and it just clock ticked down. So it was not for lack of trying. I mean, the Oilers, as you say, had 36 shots on net, but they just could not solve Mike Vernon. And of course, by this time, both Wayne Gretzky and Yari Curry, noted Calgary killers, were no longer with the team.
Right. And in Game 3, the Flames had a 3-2 lead in the third period when Anderson roofed a backhand shot on a breakaway to tie things up. And as the final seconds would tick down in regulation, the game appeared to be headed to overtime, although it didn't quite get there, Bruce.
It did not get there. Another a recent hero, Joe Murphy of the famous Kid Line in 1990. One of the guys picked up in the phenomenal trade for Jimmy Carson, would score the game winner with just 14 seconds to play in the game, set up by Simpson and Messier. So the Oilers had their guns on the ice, and they delivered in the crunch just before the end of regulation. I mean, it might as well have been overtime by that point, and a very exciting denouement.
Now, were you still a season ticket holder at this time, or were you
Yes,
just?
I was.
Okay.
My season tickets, I started in 1977 when the Oilers had, Glenn Sather was just moving from player coach to behind the bench suit coach. And the first Stanley Cup winning Oiler arrived in late October of 77 was Dave Semenko. And I kept my season tickets through the 92-93 season when the Oilers fell out of the playoffs and were clearly on the downswing for a while. And it was prices were going up, the quality of the games was going down, and my employment situation had changed. So that was the end of it.
Makes sense.
Sort of a full-time season ticket holder. I'm still on a mini pack holder to this day, but not. I couldn't afford a season ticket at this point.
I mean, the quality of hockey that you saw for 16 years between 1977 and 1993, I think would rival just about any other hockey fan across North America.
Yeah, I wouldn't trade it. I mean, you could probably find, in fact, you could find a more successful run for Montreal Canadiens if you kind of cherry pick the interval.
A little further back, yeah.
Yeah, like if you went from 1955 to 1971 with Montreal, you would get 10 cups. Not bad.
Not bad. But I mean, for you to see it in a 21 team league as opposed to a 16 league, I think makes it even more impressive. And one other reason why I still wouldn't trade what you saw compared to those fans in Montreal is the number of scoring records that you witnessed live.
100%.
I mean, just to have been in the building I'd give anything to have been in the building for one of Wayne Gretzky's historic nights. And you can't even probably take 2 hands or 3 hands to count all the ones that you saw live. So yeah, it was a pretty great run by you.
Yeah, some people say the Oilers are the greatest team of all time, and they've been recognized as that by the NHL, the 84-85 version of the team. I think that's some of the championship teams of the Montreal Canadiens in the 1970s, because they were so great defensively as well as great offensive teams. Might rank a little bit ahead, but I would say this: the Edmonton Oilers of the 1980s are the most exciting team in the history of the game,
without a doubt. And I think you mentioned that on a previous episode, that because the Habs were the full package, that's why that you might consider them giving them the nod. But I'm sure the reason the 85 Oilers were recognized is just because of how many players reached not only career marks but all-time great marks, from Gretzky to Coffey down the line.
And in the playoffs specifically. Like that was the year Gretzky scored the 47 points, the year that Curry got his 19 goals, that Coffey got the records that still stand for goals, assists, and points by defensemen, and on and on.
Unbelievable.
All of their top guys were at the top of their game.
Yeah. And in Game 4, the Flames took an early 2-0 lead on the road. However, the Oilers responded with 5 unanswered goals to seal a 5-2 come-from-behind victory at Northlands Coliseum and a 3-1 series lead. But late in the third period, things got ugly as multiple fights broke out, most notably one between Dave Brown and Jim Kite.
Yeah, that was nasty. And those were both nasty guys. Jim Kite, uh, he played for Winnipeg Jets for a number of years before that. I still remember him taking down and nearly out Paul Coffey in the '85 playoffs with a diving slash of Coffey's ankle that was not clean at all. But the Kite Brown fight was short and well, if you like fighting, sweet for oil fans. That Brown definitely got the better of it with. So I recall Kite wound up on his back and Brown started up the lawnmower and landed 2 or 3 more. You know,
on the
and
ice.
yeah, yeah. Some folks didn't like that, and but didn't seem like the folks at Northlands Coliseum minded all that much in the moment.
If a player landed 3 more clubbing blows to a player that he's on top of on the ice in today's league, what do you think the suspension for something like that would be?
Well, it certainly gets something. I mean, the linesman might have played it different too. Although, I mean, if you want to get in between Dave Brown and Jim Kite, you're a braver man than I. But they might have intervened in a different fashion than they did. And otherwise, I mean, sure, there'd probably be a suspension tacked on. But
because I watched the video on YouTube earlier today, and Brown is on top of Kite and gets him with at least 3 shots while he's laying on the ice. So I mean, he really finished him off.
Yeah, it was. And Brown was a scary individual, to say the least.
Yeah, probably not recognized enough as one of the Oilers' greatest tough guys ever. Maybe that's just because he wasn't with the team as long as some of the other ones.
Yeah, he had a fight with Stu Grimson. 2 fights with Stu Grimson in 89-90, and this was it was kind of the turning point of the season for the Oilers when they won the 90 Cup, and they never played Calgary in the playoffs that year. But they played Calgary back to back, and they played a Friday, Sunday. And the Friday game was here, and the 2 dropped the gloves, and Grimson did well, and I think he actually won the fight. There was when the teams met up again on Sunday, there was no question there would be a rematch, and it happened about 5 minutes into the game, and Brown just laid a very decisive whipping on Grimson, and put him out for a while, as I recall. And the Oilers came back and won in overtime on a goal by Marty Gelinas. Future Flame, but current Oiler Marty Gelinas scored. And it was a turning point game. Like, the Oilers kind of spinning their wheels that 89-90 season. Of course, they lost out in the first round the previous year.
Right.
They lost Gretzky, and it just, they wasn't sure where they were going. But that game early in 1990 was a turning point, and the Brown fight and the Gelinas goal both were kind of moments that.
And Jelena, a member of the kid line that helped the Oilers win that cup in 1990.
Mm-hmm.
Heading back to Calgary for Game 5, the Oilers looked to close things out on the road, but with the game tied at 2 in the second period, the Flames scored 2 goals in under a minute to take a 4-2 lead, and they wouldn't look back from there, Bruce.
Yeah, Oilers made it close. It was 4-3 sort of for the entire third period until Calgary got an empty net goal with 1 second left. But it just seemed like the Oilers, that Calgary was playing for their lives, and the Oilers were kind of, the thought was, well, we'll get them back and home like we did in games 3 and 4. But as the script had it, it didn't quite work out that way. But Calgary, my recollection of Game 5 is basically the Oilers didn't play all that well, and Calgary won it fair and square.
Yep. And in Game 6 back in Edmonton, it proved to be a goaltender's duel as Grant Fuhr and Mike Vernon each were beaten just once in regulation. But unfortunately, overtime didn't end the way Oilers fans hoped that night.
No, it did not end the way Oilers fans liked. It ended in fairly awful fashion on a brutal Mark Messier turnover in the neutral zone that sent Theo Fleury in alone for a breakaway, and he was able to slip one through Grant Fuhr and then do his famous antics on the ice where he did kind of the Nail Yakupov thing.
Yeah.
Where he was sort of flipping and rolling and diving and
even more crazy of a celebration than I think Yakupov's was.
It
ridiculous.
It was over the top, and it's still they still show this game as being at the moment of the series, with somehow people forgetting who actually won the series,
which we're going to get to next.
Yes, we are. But I mean, Fleury's goal won Game 6, sure enough, and it tied the series, but it did not win the series. But anyways, it was a dramatic moment, and it was just, as attending that game in person, it was the worst outcome. Because now we're going back to Calgary, and they won the last 2 straight, and we're on the back foot. And this from a team of Edmonton 2 years earlier had blown a 3-1 series lead against LA, and going out in the first round. And so it was it was a very uncomfortable feeling, and watching Fleury doing those. And I was never a Theo Fleury fan.
No,
lots of people were, but it was just
I share that sentiment.
Yeah, and
back
I'm certainly
then,
not one
today.
I'll tell you that.
Still,
anyways, that was. I admired him in a certain way, being such a little guy and coming up the way he did,
right.
There's respect there in the one sense, but not my favorite.
We won't go down a Theo Fleury rabbit hole today, but
right.
that's for a different topical podcast. But anyway, after fighting their way back from down 3-1 in the series, the Flames went ahead 3-0 early on in Game 7 at the Saddledome. However, Esa Tikkanen cut the deficit to 2 before the end of the opening frame. And after starting the Oilers' comeback in the first period, it seemed only fitting that Tikkanen would be the Game 7 hero.
Yeah, he came through in spades. Calgary came out hard. They got a couple power play goals. Theo Fleury scored his second goal of the series to put him up 3-0. And 16 minutes into the first, and at that moment, you think chances of Calgary, if they did their win probability thing, they'd probably have Calgary at 90% by that point. Anyway, Tikkanen scored just a minute or so later to cut the margin to 3-1. I think that was the one where he scored on a slap shot from basically the blue line, or even a little outside the blue line, just rocket that stunned Mike Vernon and the Calgary crowd, and brought Edmonton back into the game. And they kept it coming in the middle frame. Glenn Anderson, clutch goal scorer, scored another clutch goal from Esa Tikkanen. And Tikkanen himself scored the tying goal, 3-3 to halfway through the game. And all of a sudden, that entire 3-0 lead has gone. Yeah. And in the third, the Oilers got a goal from an unexpected source. Tony Semenov put him up about 5 minutes into the third, and you think, here's the comeback's complete. They're going to win 4-3 until little used Ronnie Stern scored to tie the game with 2 minutes left on an Al McGinnis shot that bounced off the backboards and favorably onto Stern's stick, and he was able to stuff it in before Grant Fuhr could get over there. So again, Edmonton's had, they're on the cusp, and it's been taken away, and into overtime we go, and not fun, but definitely exciting. And in the overtime period, they got they played about 7 minutes, and the costly part was that Mark Messier suffered a knee injury in the overtime period, which if they'd won in regulation, of course, wouldn't have happened. And that injury to Messier really crimped his style in the following series. But in the end, it was Esa Tikkanen himself scoring the hat trick goal on a shot that bounced in. He fired from outside and it caught the shin pad of future Oiler Frank Musil and over Mike Vernon's glove into the short side of the net. And just like that, it was over. And Tikkanen put on a real nice celebration. He mocked Theo Fleury a little bit in the process, but for some reason they don't ever seem to want to show that one.
Yeah.
So, but that one actually won the series.
And it was a hat trick goal in overtime.
It was a hat trick goal. He's the only guy to have done it until 2 years ago when Joel Kiviranta, of all people, a very marginal sort of fringe player for Dallas Stars, did it to Colorado in Game 7. Got his hat trick goal in overtime in Game 7.
Yeah, a pretty impressive feat to be the first. And I mean, after playing on a line with Wayne Gretzky and Jari Kurri in their respective primes, who would have thought that Tikkanen's biggest goal with the Oilers would come after they both left town?
Well, he kept them on coming. You know, he scored a lot of big goals in the playoffs in 90, 91, 92. Esa was a phenomenal playoff producer. And, you know, and he wasn't a real big scorer in the regular season, but he sure seemed to come through in key times in the playoffs. And in 91, they after winning that game, they went on to play LA Kings in the next round series, and 4 of the 6 games went to overtime, with Oilers winning 3 of them, and Tikkanen scored in double overtime, Klima scored in double overtime, McTavish scored in overtime, and these were all guys that sort of had great records of producing in the clutch. Yeah. And there was, that series against the Kings was a dandy as well, but winning Game 7 at Calgary in overtime, you know, I only wish it was a little cleaner, nicer goal. You know, it wasn't quite the Gretzky slapper, but
it still counts.
It went in the net and it counts. And
that's
I'm looking at Hockey Reference 32 years later, and it still says Edmonton won that game. You know, so
that's what matters. How it works. And, we'd have to wait another 31 years for the next playoff edition of the Battle of Alberta in the 2022 Western Conference second round. The Flames won the Pacific Division title with 111 points in 2021-22, while the Oilers finished second with 104. Bruce, I was alive for the 91 series, but I was only 2 years old. So this was the first playoff meeting between the Oilers and Flames that I actually watched. Just as a hockey fan, how excited were you to see this rivalry renewed in the playoffs after more than 3 decades?
I'm pretty thrilled. It was a long time. I mean, I looked it up at that time, and I don't have it fresh to mind. But I think the two teams almost never made the playoffs in the same year. In the intervening years, either Edmonton or Calgary was poor. At any given time. The
Flames missed for 7 straight years, and then the Oilers, after going to the final in 06, missed for the next 10 years, so there weren't a lot of opportunities.
Yeah, and I mean, starting in, from 92 to 96, Edmonton never made the playoffs, and Calgary was frequently a strong favorite, and they kept getting beat in overtime in their own building for a few years. I remember when Ray Whitney put him out with the Sharks there one time. Huge upset in the Game 7 overtime. But the two teams, I'm not sure that 2022 wasn't the first time that both teams won a playoff series in the same year, and they wound up meeting each other in round 2.
Yeah, I guess it would be the first since 88, probably.
Yeah, that they met in
because in 89 and 90 they wouldn't have, so that's
right.
That's true. And in Game 1, the Oilers fought back to reverse multiple 4-goal deficits, tying the game 6-6 early in the third period, but that's as close as the Oilers would come to victory in the the series opener, I should say, Bruce.
Yeah, and an ignominious 9-6 loss. And this was after Calgary had beaten Edmonton 9-5 in a regular season game there a few weeks earlier. And it just seemed like the Oilers couldn't stop them. Like they, as you say, they fought back. They were down 6-2, and it was out of hand. And they got a couple from Zach Hyman, Leon Draisaitl scored late in the second, Kyler Yamamoto early in the third, and they're rolling, but they just couldn't keep it up. And Rasmus Anderson of all peoples could put Calgary back ahead, and Matthew Tkachuk scored the clincher, and then the empty netter for the hat trick, and had the last laugh on a night that well, it wasn't that funny.
No.
9-6, and we had
they fell behind 3-0 so early in the game too.
Yeah.
I mean, just over halfway through the first period, and you're thinking, oh man, this is going to be a rough night. And then Mike Smith gets pulled. So, but I mean, full credit to them for battling their way back.
Yeah, only one power play goal in this game, but this was a weird one. McDavid had 4 points, -1. Draisaitl 3 points, -2. And I mean, sure, the empty net goal would be in there for certain, but still, it was just the goals were coming thick and fast at both ends of the ice, and Edmonton's inability to keep the puck out of their own net, on top of Calgary having thumped Edmonton twice in Calgary in the latter part of the season, including that 9-5 game I mentioned earlier. Like the Oilers gave up 9 to Calgary in consecutive games at the Saddledome, if my recollection is right, certainly in rapid succession.
Yeah.
And it just seemed like we just can't stop these guys. And I mean, Calgary had finished first. They were the favorite. They were starting at home again, as they had in 91 and 88. But they got the jump.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and in game 2, the Oilers fell behind 3-1 early in the second period, but Connor McDavid and Evan Bouchard answered with a pair of goals to even the score after 40 minutes. And in the final frame, the Oilers capitalized on a miscue to take their first lead in the series, Bruce.
Yeah, this was the turning point of the series in every way. Calgary had taken this. They scored 2 quick goals again. It was 2-0, 6 minutes into the game, right? I mean, Michael Stone, Brett Ritchie are scoring, for Pete's sake, and you're thinking, are we ever going to get a save? Mike Smith is, he and Koskinen both had troubles in game 1, and then he had a slow start to game 2. But the funny thing about this game, Calgary made it 3-1. Edmonton bounced back. McDavid scored immediately to make it 3-2, and it stayed 3-2 for a while. But Edmonton just started to take over, and they won this game on merit. They came all the way back to win it 5-3, and they won it because they were the better team, and they took control of the game and the series midway through game 2, after giving up, 12 goals in the first 4 periods and a little bit. And they started winning more puck battles. They started, playing tighter defensively and really bringing it to Calgary. But it was a shorthanded goal by Zach. Yes, another shorty by the Oilers against the Flames that turned out to be the game winner in the third period, and then Draisaitl followed up with a clincher assisted by none other than Mike Smith to wrap it up at 5-3. And it was one of those games. It was 5-3, and down the stretch, like just the way they were playing, I was confident. They are the better team. They are winning this game, and all of a sudden, I like their chances after sort of first 1.5 games of the series of being second best. They just flipped the script.
Yeah, without a doubt. And then after a scoreless opening frame in Game 3, Evander Kane enjoyed his best period of hockey as a member of the Edmonton Oilers in the second.
Yeah, this was a fun one for Edmonton. It was the first period was quiet, and Hyman opened scoring in the first minute of the second, and then Kane, his 8th, 9th, and 10th of the playoffs. And in this game, Draisaitl had 4 assists and McDavid had 3.
Yeah.
and they were on the same line with Kane, and Kane was just cleaning up, and the Oilers suddenly, after in a 12-minute span, they scored all four of their goals, and Calgary only got a late consolation goal to cut it to 4-1, break the shutout. But Edmonton was by some margin again on this night the better of the two teams.
Yeah, Evander Kane, of course, scoring that natural hat trick in exactly 6 minutes. It's also worth noting that Leon Draisaitl matched the NHL record for most assists in a playoff period with 4, and Connor McDavid became the first player in NHL history to record 9 multi-point games within his team's first 10 playoff games in a year. So not a bad start when you do something that Wayne Gretzky has never even done.
Yeah, unreal, and they'd already survived, of course, a 7-game set with the Kings. So this was, in fact, already their 10th playoff game in just Game 3 of the second round.
Yep.
But the scorers scored, and the rest of the team, looked after the defensive end, and they Kane.
And sorry.
Kane was the goal scoring hero, but his line mates were doing the work,
setting records along the way. And in Game 4, the Oilers jumped out to a 3-0 lead in the first period, but the Flames stormed all the way back to tie the game 3-3, including one of the craziest goals I've ever seen by Rasmus Andersson on Mike Smith. Bruce, what was going through your head when you saw that puck go in? And also, how relieved were you for all of Oil Country, and maybe especially Mike Smith, after how that game was going in the third period?
Yeah, there was a shorthanded goal by Rasmus Andersson, who will not be playing in this weekend's Heritage Classic because of some goonery in the recent past. But good player. And looked like he was just clearing the puck down the ice on a just slap shot down the ice, and Smith claimed that he just lost the puck in the crowd, like it was a high shot that kind of went up and dipped down into the top of the net from 160 feet. It was
from
ridiculous
his own blue line, something like that.
How far away he was, yeah. And of course the Mike Smith anti-fan club were out in spades after that one, and and with some justification. I mean, 3-2 in the third period, you don't want your netminder sieving one in from the other end, but it happened, and the Oilers were somehow able to right the ship, and then Ryan Nugent-Hopkins turned out to be the goal-scoring hero, popping home the game winner with 3.5 to play to put the Oilers up, and then empty netter would ultimately make it 5-3. But this was a game that went from a joyride to a very tense and intense nail biter, but ultimately the happy ending.
And Bruce, continuing our trend of talking about the most memorable goals or most important goals in a Oilers player's career, from Gretzky in '88 to Tikkanen in '91, would you call that goal by Nuge in 2022 his most impactful goal in the NHL?
That's a good question, but I'm very probably right. I mean, he's been a good player for a long time, but he didn't play in a lot of playoff games for the first chunk of his career. And he's known more as a playmaker than a goal scorer, but popping that one home was just an absolutely gigantic snipe for the Nuge.
And we're going to talk about another goal that will probably be considered the most memorable goal of another player's career in a second here. In Game 5, both teams combined for 7 goals in just over 11 minutes in the second period, and were tied 4-4 after 40 minutes. Bruce, just to finish up tonight, take us through the controversial disallowed goal late in the third period and then the eventual overtime winner.
Sure. Yeah, it was. That second period was wild. It went from 2-0 Calgary to 3-2 Edmonton, and within 31 seconds of Edmonton going ahead, Calgary went ahead 4-3, And 40 seconds after that, Edmonton tied it again at 4-4, and then it just stayed 4-4 right through the third period. And for a brief moment, it looked like Calgary had scored to go ahead 5-4 on a goal off the skate. What's that guy's name again? You know it. Yeah, Blake Coleman. And it was such a strange play, and that puck would have gone in the net had Coleman simply left it alone. It was going in. He wanted to make sure it was going in. He just nudged it really with his skate. But the refs deemed, and I think correctly in the limited sense, that it was deliberate. He did nudge it into the net with his skate. And they ruled it a kicking motion. Now, many in Calgary will tell you, well, he didn't really kick it. He just kind of, nudged it. But he did use his skate in a
forward motion.
And in a premeditated style, at least premeditated within the moment.
I guess the NHL's
I want to help that puck over the goal line, and he did, and
last
he
fight
paid
is a
for
kick.
it. Yeah. So the call, I mean, it was a dicey call, and it could have gone the other way, but
I thought it was going to. I was watching that game with my dad, and I remember when they were reviewing it, he said, "This is going to count," and we were both very surprised, happily surprised when it didn't.
Well, my thought was we're just going to have to tie it up again.
Yep.
It turned out we didn't have to tie it up again. We just had to get the winner later.
And I'll let you describe that one.
Oh my goodness. So good. And this was 5 minutes into the overtime frame, and was just again, the game on a knife edge, but of course, this isn't game 7 overtime like the Tican is. This is game 5, where Calgary's just trying to stay alive. And Edmonton alone has a chance to end the series. And in fact, it is Edmonton who do score and end the series as that reliable combination of Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid connected. And let's bear in mind here that Draisaitl had been limping around all series with
high ankle sprain.
With a high ankle sprain suffered when he was slew-footed down by Mikey Anderson of LA Kings in the first round playoffs. So the whole series, and that's why McDavid and Draisaitl were playing together.
Right.
On the one line was because Dry was on the limp, and they didn't want him skating the full 200 feet that the centers do, but they wanted to keep him out there. Playing and contributing, and he changed his game. It was something to see. I mean, he's always been a great passer, but he's also always been a great sniper, and 3-time now 50 goal scorer. And but in this series, he turned completely into a playmaker. Leon did. Anyway, the puck came along the sidewall in the overtime, and he was in a one-on-one battle. The guy, was it Rasmus Anderson? I think maybe it was. It took Draisaitl down along the boards, but while he was on the way down, Leon was able to get a stick on the puck and slide it through to McDavid in the slot with a clear look at the net, and ding, McDavid rings it right in off the post, past the embattled Jacob Markstrom to end the series with just a perfectly placed shot after the nice pass set up from Leon, and who else to score the winning goal but Connor McDavid, and who else to set it up but Leon Draisaitl. These are the modern Oilers. And for Draisaitl, it was a record, not just a milestone, but a record. It was his 15th assist in the series.
Yeah.
No player in NHL history has ever scored more than 14 assists in a playoff series. Wayne Gretzky was among those that had done it in the past. And Draisaitl did it in just 5 games, while basically playing on one leg or 1.5 legs, by being compromised, certainly. And he just turned up his playmaking chops, and of course, feeding McDavid is never a bad idea. At any time, you can get a first assist or a second assist by sending it to Connor. And in this case, Connor just rang it in off the post, and that was that. But such a performance by Leon. In the series, he had 3 points in all 5 games.
Yeah.
And it was the previous playoff record, I think, was 3 plus point games in a row, and he got 5.
There were so many milestones set in that series.
Yeah.
Zach Hyman
on his injury set
too.
several of them, and it's a feat that still I hold in some awe to this day.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's when you go back and read the list of records that McDavid and Draisaitl were had either broken or were chasing just in that one round alone. It's makes it even more remarkable that Draisaitl was doing it on one leg basically. But that combination of the dynamic duo is just more than the Flames could handle, and probably brought back some memories of watching Gretzky and Curry together work their magic in the mid 80s. So yeah, to get to see those was the closest that I've ever seen to that type of offensive dominance in the playoffs. And for me, who didn't start following the NHL until the mid to late 90s, I mean, this was after the 2006 Cup run. This was probably the greatest run of hockey that I had ever been able to watch, and just an incredible spring of, I think the playoff run lasted 36 days of hockey that they gave us that spring in 2022.
Yeah, well, in that series, Draisaitl, they played, of course, 5 games, 2 goals, 15 assists, 17 points, plus 8. McDavid, 3 goals, 9 assists, 12 points, plus 9. Hyman, 6 goals, 2 assists, 8 points, plus 7. Kane, 5 goals, 1 assist, plus 2. And Nugent Hopkins, 6 points as well. And so the big Oilers scorers scored. Yeah. And ultimately, that was the difference in all of their wins. They got 4 or 5 goals, and they were, they were just able to outscore not just their mistakes but their opponents.
And if I'm not mistaken, McDavid led the playoffs in points, Draisaitl led the playoffs in assists, and Kane led the playoffs in goals. Yes. And they didn't even reach the Stanley Cup final.
Yes, yeah.
It just made
3 different guys in the 3 categories.
Yeah.
And they, Kane, I think he might have been tied in the end. I think maybe,
but still, he got, even if it's a tie,
caught him, in the 4th round.
Yeah, I mean, even this year, Draisaitl led the playoffs in goals, but with a tie, I think, with Marchessault. But I mean, an incredible feat. You look at McDavid, also first player to lead the league in regular season scoring and playoff scoring in the same year since Evgeny Malkin in 2008-2009. And the first player to lead the playoffs in scoring without reaching the final since Peter Forsberg in 2001-2002. So he really took his game to another stratosphere during that playoff run where he was over 2 points a game and basically carried it through all the way last year in the regular season and playoffs as well.
Yeah. I mean, they had McDavid and Draisaitl both averaged 2 points a game in the playoffs, and they were the first guys to do it in a long time.
Unbelievable. I don't think Draisaitl's playoff run gets recognized as enough, but he was only 1 point behind McDavid in the 2022 playoffs. So just an incredible run. Bruce, I want to say thanks again for sticking with me here for nearly 2.5 hours talking about as per usual for the 4 episodes that we've done. And like I said, it's always great talking about the glory days of the past, although it's also fun getting to talk about the modern day Oilers as well.
Glory days of the recent past.
Yeah. Exactly. And, 5 out of the 6 series that we recapped tonight ended on a positive note from an Oilers fan's perspective. So, like I said, just always a pleasure to have you on the show here. And hopefully with the Heritage Classic this weekend, and that's going to be the biggest Battle of Alberta since the 2022 playoffs, that game will also end with a positive result.
Got some stats for you before we go.
All
23
right.
wins for the Oilers, 12 for Calgary. Of course, you mentioned 5 series wins to 1. 157 goals for Edmonton, 116 for Calgary. So significant in the Oilers' favor. And let's just remember that the last 3 times that the Oilers met Calgary, that Calgary had the home ice advantage. And from the perspective of fans in the Saddle Dome, the last second of hockey in those 3 years were Wayne Gretzky scoring in overtime in Game 2 of '88, Esa Tikkanen scoring in overtime in Game 7 of '91, and Connor McDavid scoring in overtime in Game 5 of 2022. Have a nice summer.
There you go. Bruce, fantastic. Are you working on anything at the Cult of Hockey before we call it a night?
Yeah, nothing quite so happy, I'm afraid. I'm writing a post today. I went to the game last night and had some observations, and then I was sitting in the end zone sort of watching the East-West game, which you can see so well from behind the net where I love to sit as an old goalie. And then I forced myself to sit through the entire 3,600 seconds today, just watching the replay of the North-South game. And in neither game did it look very good at all. They've got problems. I got problems. And I've got, lots of time to solve them, but time to get started with it. No better time than Sunday in the Heritage Classic against the Calgary Flames.
I couldn't think of a better time to start a winning streak, and I will be driving out to Edmonton tomorrow, so I look forward to being. I was at the Heritage Classic in 2016 in Winnipeg as well.
Oh yeah. Oh right. The Oilers won, the shutout.
They did. They did an outstanding job of hosting it, and I'm looking forward to this one as well. And I'll also quickly mention that alumni game in Winnipeg was the only time I've ever watched Wayne Gretzky play live. So that was actually the biggest reason why I went. I'm sure I would have went anyway, but when it was announced that there was going to be an alumni game, which they announced months in advance, and that Wayne Gretzky was going to be a part of it, I said, I'm 27 years old at the time. He retired when I was 10. This is probably going to be his last one of these old timer type games. So if I'm ever going to see my hero play live, this is going to be it. And it didn't really matter to me how he was playing at the time, or what he was able to bring. There were obviously better players, younger players on the ice, but
even
just
in 2003 he was sort of a shadow of
right. But he doesn't skate consistently. There are players who, like Mark Messier and Paul Coffey, really stood out in that game, and they're roughly the same age as Wayne. So you can tell the guys who are still on the skates regularly and still either play pickup hockey or are involved with games. But Wayne said it multiple times. He doesn't skate anymore. He skates like once or twice a year. He skated his whole life, so I don't blame him for being at that stage of his career, but it was just great to get the chance to see him live one time.
No doubt. Yeah. Well, I was lucky enough to see him play live roughly 500 times. And, that's a hockey fan's dream come true, surely.
Yeah.
And to see the great team that surrounded him as well. So those are memories that I cherish to this day.
Absolutely. And I'm sure that I will have you back on the show in the future to talk about more of Gretzky and the Oilers milestones from those days.
Sounds good.
All right, Bruce, have a good night.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks for listening, everybody who's hung in there. It's fun to talk about old times.
So for Bruce McCurdy, I'm Eric Friesen. This has been the 99 Forever podcast. We're out.